Ladies and gentlemen, at any moment during the next 30 minutes, someone might receive $1,000 cash. At any moment during the next 30 minutes.
Really?
You bet your life. Here's the show that has the $1,000 bell that rings at the mention of the mystery word. And here's the star of You Bet Your Life, one of the greatest stars of all time.
Jupiter.
A man known to millions everywhere.
Howard Hughes.
Someone who's worked up from the bottom of the ladder.
Oh, Margaret Truman.
The one and only...
It's the Marx Brothers Council Podcast. This is episode 43. I take it out once in a while. Hi again, folks. My name is Bob Gassell, and I'll be your host today. Joining me, as always, are Matthew Conium, founder of the Marx Brothers Council and author of several books, including The Annotated Marx Brothers, and That's Me, Groucho, as well as the soon-to-be-published Annotated Milli Vanilli. Have I got that right?
Absolutely, yeah. The Annotated Abbott and Costello.
Oh, okay.
You foolish boy.
And when will that be coming? Do we know?
God knows. Maybe September, maybe the year after. It's McFarland.
Okay. Spanky. Also joining us is Noah Diamond, who brought Alsatias back to the New York stage after almost a century, and who details that experience and the show's history in his wonderful book, Give Me a Thrill, The Story of Alsatias. He has hosted several Marx Brothers-related events, both online and in person, and if my sources are correct, is preparing a stage production of a Skidoo.
That's right. Yes, that's my passion project. I'm happy to see you guys. I'm here for the Jay Leno podcast.
Anyhow, while we sit here in our bubble discussing the Marx Brothers films month in and month out, the fact is that Groucho's greatest popularity and greatest personal satisfaction as a performer came from his 14-year stint as host of You Bet Your Life. Unlike his brothers, Groucho was not only determined to make it as a solo performer, but to do so outside the iconic character that he no longer wanted to inhabit. After the team's first farewell film, The Big Store, Groucho spent the next several years looking for a second act. The solo film offers he expected did not come flying in, at least ones that interested him, and his attempts at radio failed to find an audience. He was everyone's favorite guest star, but had yet to find a show of his own. That is, until he met a producer by the name of John Goodell, who found a way to harness Groucho's talents in a unique way, and who produced a groundbreaking show with many innovations that became commonplace. Now, none of us here are real experts on You Bet Your Life. Those people are either laying low or just plain don't want to talk to us. So to fill the void, we are proud to welcome someone who's met John Goodell and head writer Bernie Smith. Here he is, the recently retired and recently sober Jay Hopkins.
Oh my goodness, do you know the meaning of the word libel?
Hey, I'll lawyer up, man. I'll call Jackie Childs.
But I'm happy to fill any void you say, and keep it clean though.
Just say the secret void.
No, I mean, maybe you might not, I don't know what, you say you're not an expert. You certainly know more about the show and its history than we do, and you come at the right price, so here you are.
Well, I'll accept the latter explanation, yes.
So as fans of the podcast know, a while back we presented a vintage interview Jay did with John Goodell. And in that same vein, we have yet another special treat from Jay that we'll get to later on. But in the meantime, I'm going to throw it over to Matthew, who's going to give us a little background on the genesis of You Bet Your Life.
Yes, well, I mean, you covered it fairly ably yourself there. Basically, as we know, Groucho spent most of the 40s trying and failing to be a radio star. He had the Pabst Blue Ribbon Hour, which didn't sort of light any major fires. And apart from that, it was basically just lots and lots of guest star stints on other people's shows, which in the main, I think, involved him kind of cutting loose and disrupting the show, ad-libbing to whatever extent. So really, I think that was kind of his shtick on radio was to come on and pull the wheels off. But apparently, it was one occasion in particular, John Goodell was present, and it was an all-star bill, and it was a sketch with Groucho and Bob Hope, and the story is kind of, the legend has grown in the telling. Supposedly, they abandoned their scripts and just went into a flurry of ad-libbing. As I believe we're about to find out, it wasn't quite like that. But anyway, Goodell was there. He was very impressed, and he pitched the idea of the game show to Groucho. Groucho didn't want to do a game show. He thought they were pretty much the lowest rung of entertainment. He did it very reluctantly. He didn't do it, I don't think, with any great expectation of it being a success. It wasn't an overnight success, but very quickly it did become a huge hit. Listening to it now and watching it now, it seems very much within the parameters, I think, of 1950s light entertainment. But I guess at the time it was just that little bit friskier, a little bit fresher, a little bit more irreverent. And it finally rang the bell for him and ended his radio drought.
You know, that story is basically how the legend goes. Though reading Groucho's account of these events in The Secret Word is Groucho, which he co-wrote with, who was it? Hector Arce?
Yeah.
Groucho does not really seem to balk at the initial suggestion of a game show. He's like, why not? Sure. Everything else has failed. Why not try this?
That's a surprise, isn't it? Yeah.
Anyhow,
I think.
Go ahead.
I think that's because Goodell was involved with the book, and Bernie Smith was involved with the book, and he's looking back on it being his greatest personal success. So I think he's kind of mellowed. If you look at his letters to Miriam around the time, he's very, very scathing of doing it.
Okay, now, before we dive into the show proper, I'm going to play for you the inspiration for the series, and that's the skit that Groucho did with Bob Hope, which supposedly inspired John Goodell to approach Groucho and offer him the idea for a series. So we're going to listen to the whole thing here. It's about 10 minutes long, so sit back and enjoy.
Now we're back at the radio station on the desert. Bob has just arrived from Hollywood, where he's been trying to line up talent for the Walgreens show.
Well, at least I had Cass Daly and Dennis Day coming down to the station, but I wasn't too sure that they'd appear on the show. If they didn't, I'd have to return the $50,000 that Walgreens had given me. Of course, I wouldn't mind that. I thought this was just a story. It's a fantasy, isn't it? But right now, I was rolling in money, and after I was through rolling in it, I'd pick it up and put it back in the safe. I was trying to think of a plan to get Cass and Dennis on the show when I heard a knock at the office door. Come in.
How do you do? Are you the lady of the house, or do I have smog on my glasses? After looking you over carefully, I hope it is smog.
Well, Groucho Marx. Groucho, what are you doing out here in the desert?
Desert? I've been sitting in the dressing room for 40 minutes. Some desert, all right. Selling mink coats. Here's a beauty, only $40.
Mink coats for $40? How can you sell them so cheap?
Well, I have no overhead. I don't advertise. I don't pay rent, and I steal the coats.
Groucho, I know you don't steal those coats. Where do you get them?
Very simple. I trap them with my big musical trap. I walk out into the woods and play seductive music on my zither. The little animals hear the music, do a striptease, and take off their furs.
Did I tell you about the two vultures that were plucking each other?
Well, it's hard to do without two.
You can start working on the record now, fellas.
It's a good thing they got an extra supply of wax out there.
Would we be fated? Oh!
This will be the biggest crap game in history. Yeah?
Look, Groucho.
I think it's your time.
Yeah, I think so.
You want to quit right now?
I sure
huh?
never... I'm never going to give you another feed, you know. I'm never going to give you another feed. You know, we have a hookup with Lee Francis, you know.
Yeah.
Look, Groucho, I don't need a mink coat. I'm an etching man myself.
Wait till I catch up on you. Oh, here. Oh, yes. Well, you wear one of my mink coats, you'll be etching. Well, we can cut that, too, I guess. Well, I suppose the girls would find the coat too warm out here in the desert.
Well, I always find the girls are warmest when you promise them the coat. Once they get it on, they cool off.
Not these coats, Bob. These coats are all hot. Hope this is some radio. Okay, I'll do as much for you, Bob.
Thank you.
This is some radio station here. What?
What?
What? Now, look, you're not going to suck me into an Abbott and Costello routine. Huh? With me playing Abbott. You get your own Chico. But why have you got this place hidden out in the desert? I started out last night and trying to find it. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Well, where did you stay last night?
In a haystack.
Well, was it comfortable?
No, I kept sitting on the needle. But I found out one thing. A needle always points north.
Say, Groucho,
There's
excuse
an astronomer in the orchestra, huh?
Groucho,
I wish
excuse
there
me.
was a musician in them. Huh?
We ought to work this way. They're much better here.
Well, don't forget, they're getting paid.
We're stealing.
And don't forget, I'm getting paid.
Groucho, excuse me a minute. I have to make an announcement on the air. Step into the studio with me, will you?
You notice everybody in radio wears wooden shoes?
Well, here we are. Just pull up a kilocycle and sit down, Groucho. I'll be right with you. At the next musical note, will someone please call and give us the correct time? Those Ingersoll people are really on their toes, aren't they? We interrupt today's musical program for a dispatch from Cairo, Egypt. But none of us understand Egyptian, so back to the program. Well, that takes care of that, Groucho.
Is that all you do?
Is that all I do?
That's a nice line after
What?
standing at the
Why make announcements, give the time, do the bookkeeping, and on top of that, I'm a disc jockey.
Disc jockey. My brother Chico used to be a disc jockey. He spun the records on his head. On his head, it's possible. You know, after every 1,000 records, he had to have his head sharpened.
Do you unwind, or is there some place I can pull the plug out on you?
Let's keep Crosby out of this, huh?
Groucho, I'm just trying to prove to you that I have too much to do around here. What I need is a business manager. I'm carrying too heavy a load.
You think you're carrying a load? You should have seen me last night. Okay, I'll take the job. Where's the safe, and who's got the combination?
Groucho, get away
Don't
from
tell
that
me you're
safe.
wearing it, huh?
Get away from that safe.
Oh, I just wanted to see when you open the door if a little light goes on.
You're thinking of an icebox.
No, I'm not. I'm thinking of Lana Turner, and that's hardly an icebox.
Pardon me a moment, Groucho. I have to make an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, Gillette Blue Blades bring you another important championship fight. Remember, look sharp, feel sharp, be sharp. And there's the bell. Well? Well, Groucho, that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, Gillette Blue Blades bring you another important championship fight. Remember, look sharp, feel sharp, be sharp. And there's the bell.
It's a nice pot I've got here, huh? Now, where do you get this line now? Hey, Hope, what is this?
Return match.
My script was written by intermission. I hope if you ask me, that fight was framed. And listen, Bob, before I go into this deed, we'll have to have an understanding. You see, I'm in the habit of always picking up a little something on the side.
Fine, if you do, see if she's got a friend for me.
I'm talking about money.
Don't worry, you'll get paid.
I know, but name a figure.
Rita Hayworth.
I mean a round figure.
Crosby. Now, just step out in here, Groucho. This will be your office. Now, anything you want.
Yes, now, the first thing I want to do is put this station in better shape. The place looks terrible, Bob. You ought to get some real Venetian blinds.
Real Venetian blinds?
Yes, it doesn't look businesslike hanging up your long underwear and opening and closing the flap.
Well, maybe I could put in a zipper. Now, look, Groucho, I think...
Now, never mind what you think. Just keep your flap shut.
Yeah.
And furthermore, Hope, the next thing that
Groucho, you don't let me get a word in edgewise.
I don't like a word that comes in edgewise. Either it comes in straight or not at all.
Well, Groucho, you got to be sensible. I'm putting on a show for Walgreen tonight.
Is that so? Well, tell me, how much are they paying you?
Oh, well, they're not really going to pay me anything. I'm doing it just for the prestige. Otherwise, it would cost them a pretty penny.
I see. Well, never mind the pretty pennies. How many ugly dollars are you getting?
I'm not getting a cent, Groucho. If that's a lie, may the roof fall in. I guess he won. I forgot the answer.
How do you think I feel? I had the next line. Now, Bob, let's be honest. We're both crooks.
Now, Groucho, I'm not going to... I didn't look at that good. Groucho, I'm not going to get a cent. Now, if that's a lie, I'm a gopher.
Now, don't be silly and stop trying to gnaw a hole in the floor.
Bob, may I see you a second?
Oh, sure, Marv. Excuse me, Grouch. This is very important, a matter of life for Sinatra. Say thanks for interrupting. You saved me some money.
I've been working on an idea for the Walgreen show. Do you want to hear it?
Did you hear about the two vultures who were plucking each other?
That's my egg. Leave it alone.
So that was March 27th, 1947. And You Bet Your Life premiered the following October.
I have two thoughts straight away. The first is that I always assumed, or in the past I'd always assumed, that when a guest star comes on one of these comedy shows, the normal writers for the show write their bit. But that, I think, is the third time I've heard him do that mink coat routine. So it kind of implies that he brings his little specialty with him, which is interesting, I think. The other thing, I think, is my feeling is that kind of confirms what I thought, which is, although doubtless a lot of what they said and did was spontaneous, it was nonetheless planned that they would go off script at that point and do some spontaneous stuff, because there are written lines in there with Hope saying, I can't get a word in edgeways and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I guess they did it extremely well, and that was what got Goodell's attention, but I'm sure it was what they were meant to do at that point.
I think it's interesting that the audience, the studio audience, responds so much more favorably to the apparently spontaneous jokes than to the prepared ones. And there isn't necessarily an obvious difference in quality if you just quoted them as lines. But spontaneity itself, or even the illusion of spontaneity, is so much more richly amusing in this kind of context where there's an expectation of kind of formulaic humor.
So, Jay, how does this mesh with your understanding of how Goodell was inspired to do the series?
Well, it was very interesting to me because I could not detect what I regarded to sound as genuine ad-libbing. I mean, beyond the narrow parameter of what we're accustomed to Groucho doing, like a line or two. I didn't detect a protracted sequence where they seemed to be, as I would characterize it, fumbling around. To me, it sounded very much like, 98% of this was from a script.
Well, Well, I'd always been a little wary of that, the legend, because Bob Hope was not known as an ad-libber. You know, he's famously was a great joke teller, but not known as an ad-libber. So
I think the story is that Hope inadvertently dropped the script.
Right.
And then that Groucho deliberately followed up by dropping his. That's the story, whether or not it's accurate.
And stepped on it, right? That he stepped on Hope's script to prevent him from picking it up.
He stepped on Hope's lines more than he stepped on his script.
Yeah, there's no moment in that recording where it seems like that's happened.
But to be fair, at least legend has it that this went on for like 30, 45 minutes in the studio. And what we got here is a heavily edited version, which aired.
True.
So we don't know exactly what it was like in the studio.
I was going to say, presumably they did pick the best bits, though. You know, I mean, apart from risque stuff that they had to cut, I imagine that what we're hearing is the best of it.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if maybe for the sake of the story, this radio appearance with Groucho and Hope could have been conflated with some other time, maybe at a USO show or something, when they did go off script a little more flagrantly.
Yeah, I could certainly see that. Anyhow, let's jump ahead. Groucho and Goodell worked on the idea, and soon they were ready to record a pilot episode. So they commandeered Art Linkletter's audience in studio after a show one day and recorded their first attempt at You Bet Your Life. They used Art's announcer, Jack Slattery, I believe his name was. And outside of a few little things here and there, it's very similar to the typical You Bet Your Life episode. All the things are in place. Groucho does seem a little caffeinated, a bit excited. He actually at times feels more like his movie character than the relaxed quizmaster we got to know later on.
Welcome to You Bet Your Life. Folks, we advertise for a lot of people to come to the show today who are interested in getting married, but who haven't found the right mate yet. And just before we went on the air, these two volunteers were chosen from the audience. Have you two met each other before?
No.
Miss McHugh, shake hands with Mr. Brooks.
How do you do?
I now pronounce you man and wife.
Hey, wait a minute, Groucho. You're going a little bit too fast.
Well, I guess I was a little hasty. So you two want to get married, eh?
That's right.
Mr. Brooks, may I ask one question?
Yes, Mr. Mark.
Why?
So they finished this episode and brought it around to all the networks, and they were turned down everywhere, believe it or not. I don't think it was because they didn't like the show. I think they were just wary because Groucho had no success as the star of his own series. And this was a totally different beast, being the game show, and perhaps they didn't know what to make of it. So everybody turned them down, and they didn't know where to turn. Finally...
Could I jump in with a little factoid for the listeners? I was reading Robert Dwan's book, As Long as They're Laughing, recently. And he points out that Goodell and Groucho had, well, in fact, this audition record that you refer to was in fact originally rejected by all three networks, NBC, CBS, and ABC. So what Goodell did, being rather savvy about such things, he went in search of a sponsor.
Right.
Let me read a little bit from a letter I received from John Goodell. I think it touches on this. This is from August 21st, 1978. He writes, "We went on the air October 27, 1947 on ABC for Elgin American Compact Company." And then he this is what I wanted to bring up. I sold the show to the client after reading that he was at the Beverly Hills Hotel to buy a Phil Baker quiz show. I got to him before he signed with Baker. The client didn't know Groucho had flopped 4 times on the radio. I had previously taken the audition record to all 3 networks, but they all turned it down because they knew of his flops. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that he had enough smarts and showbiz savvy to forget the network idea since they were not interested and went directly in search of a client, which in this case, as he says, was Elgin American Compacts.
Groucho surrounded himself with these savvy radio minds who were doing whatever they could to make him and the show work. Perhaps the most important decision in the history of You Bet Your Life was the choice to record it and edit it down. Now, a lot of people think they recorded it ahead of time because they were worried that Groucho was going to go off color or be dirty, but that wasn't it at all. They just decided that they were going to record 45 or 60 minutes or whatever it was and edit it down and get the best 30-minute episode. It's very simple and very logical.
So was that probably one of the first times it was ever consciously done for the purposes of making the show better? I mean, obviously editing was there to remove any disasters,
Right.
But just as a general purpose tool to make the thing better by slicing it up and picking the best bits. I guess that was pretty new.
And I was going to say, in terms of the timing with technology, that was very key.
Yeah.
I think that Robert Dwan writes something to the effect of he was working with acetate records. Am I right about that?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
records originally. But then either during the second or the third year on radio, magnetic tape suddenly became available. But then there was a learning curve for Dwan and his assistants, his editing assistants, with that too, because he had to figure out how to physically edit this audio tape because it was so brand new.
Right.
I think Bing Crosby's people introduced it originally. And Crosby also worked for ABC Radio at the time, so it was easy enough for Dwan and company to glom on to one of these few audio tape recording devices that were available to them. And of course, later, when they were shooting television, they shot it, as we know, on film, because videotape did not exist at that time. And they continued to shoot on, I think it was 35 millimeter film. There was a kind of a technical dovetailing, if you will.
Yes, yeah.
I think it's interesting as well. There are some unedited recordings around, aren't there, that you can listen to, the pre-edited versions. They tend to be about an hour long. And it's interesting if you listen to them, because you don't very often get the sense that Groucho knows he's got this luxury, he's got this liberty, and he just relaxes into it and kind of lets it all hang out. I mean, he's still basically doing the show in one, isn't he? Mm-hmm. And then only when the opportunity presents itself do they take advantage of that facility.
They're delightful, those unedited episodes. It's kind of a revelation.
And now, once and for all, Groucho decided to drop the grease paint mustache. He decided he wasn't going to wear it on stage in front of the studio audience like he had for many of his radio appearances of the day. He was dropping it for good. And Bernie Smith did convince him, though, to grow a regular mustache to make himself somewhat recognizable. And, it's probably just as well, because this wasn't the movie character at all. A lot of people think it's an extension of it, but I don't buy that. He wasn't being harsh. He wasn't being insulting. He was doing gentle, real-life humor, and that was totally opposite of what his movie character was all about. It seems somewhat similar in delivery and in tone, but when you think about it, it's really a totally different character.
And often self-deprecating as well, which is the exact opposite.
Yes, he's never, or let's say rarely, does he insult the contestants. There's almost no insult humor on You Bet Your Life. Usually the stance he assumes is one of bafflement. Mm-hmm. He plays the puzzled interviewer trying to make sense of what he's being told, and it's only the kind of labyrinth of his comic mind that makes everything seem funny. Very often contestants would just tell him what they did for a living, and the audience would laugh at what they knew he was thinking.
Yeah.
And And the very famous one with that strange man Albert Hall. Again,
Yes.
there is a golden opportunity for him to go into insult humour, but instead he acts frightened of him, which is so much funnier. It's really, really good the way he implies that he's actually terrified of this weird bloke stood there.
Where did you go when you left the farm?
Lincoln, Nebraska.
What were you doing there?
Well, I went to school there. When I quit school, I got a job on the Nebraska State Journal as a printer's devil.
Will you ask him the next question? You were apprentice devil. Well, why did you get fired? Maybe you weren't the type, huh?
I didn't get fired.
Oh. Well, what sort of work have you been doing lately?
Well,
homicide?
I came to Seattle and I got a job on the Seattle
You imagine
Times.
if he doesn't win any money here, what's going to happen to me? I'm leaving long before that. You say you went to Seattle and you got a job on the paper?
Seattle Times in the composing room.
I see. And how long were you there?
15 years.
Maybe I can out-frighten him.
Really, really good stuff.
It's interesting that his persona on the quiz show, unlike his screen character and his stage character, where the point was always to kind of break down the assumed realities, talk to the audience, what we would now call meta-theatrical choices. And the quiz show, which has no pretense at all, We're not being presented with a story or characters or anything fictional. He's supposed to be in direct address to the audience. And most of the time, what he winds up doing is, struggling to honor the rules. He seems to be playing a fellow who'd be happy to get through this quiz show normally if these crazy contestants would just let him.
And also interesting, following on from what you said, Bob, about him abandoning his traditional look. It's interesting as well, isn't it, how his quiz show look then sort of almost becomes a look in itself, his new look, to the extent that in the film A Girl in Every Port, where he's playing a sailor, he is recognizably the You Bet Your Life Groucho. He's wearing the same glasses and obviously the real moustache. And, he's obviously being that Groucho in the film.
Still, you got to put yourself in the place of the audience in 1947. Now think about it. Maybe there were some print ads and some newspaper photos, but they couldn't see him on the radio. They were picturing the grease paint mustache character doing the show. I don't think it was till the TV version premiered where this new image of Groucho really took hold with the public. Okay, so now we got to address the elephant in the room, and that is how much of the show was actually scripted and prepared. I guess it depends on who you talk to. You talk to the writers and producers, it's a majority of the show. You talk to Groucho, it was just a token amount. So I'm guessing the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
By an odd coincidence, Bob, I mentioned to Steve Stolier recently, I assume I don't need to identify this character. Anyway, I sent him an email merely mentioning that I was looking forward to this podcast, and he wrote a brief remark which he gave me basically permission to read this. And he says of the podcast, he says, I hope you explain that just because suggested lines were shown on an overhead projector behind the contestants, that doesn't mean the whole show was scripted, as I've heard some people say. For one thing, you could never count on normal people to have a sense of timing or read off cue cards convincingly. It would have been a horrible show if that had been the case. So it's fine to admit that his writers prepared a lot of material for him ahead of time. It wasn't all off-the-cuff stuff, but it does Groucho a great disservice to dismiss all he did as, quote, reading a script off cue cards, unquote, or an overhead projector. It's interesting because I was listening to the Bernie Smith interview that I did years ago. Last night I was listening to it, and of course his stance is a little more behind the role of the writer. I think he actually says, and I think I've got a letter where he reiterates this, that he speculates that perhaps, what was it, about 80%?
80%.
Yeah, you heard the same thing. So, yeah, it's interesting. But how they pulled that off is fascinating to me, that there are very few indications that he is reading.
There's a big difference, isn't there, between prepared and scripted? I mean, you can be prepared without being scripted, and it's very obvious, even just from watching the show, that it isn't utterly by design. It feels spontaneous because it largely is. But he would be armed, as you know, with a few good jokes, solid jokes about what the contestant did for a living, or he'd be prepared for what was funny about this particular interview subject. I think he liked his prepared material and he took it out once in a while.
Yeah, I think both extremes are obviously wrong. Groucho went too far in implying that it was basically all ad-libbed. That inevitably causes people to go to the other extreme and say it's all scripted. Obviously, it isn't all scripted. On the other hand, we're not just talking about a few little jokes here and there. I mean, they had a staff, they had a team of writers who every week, went away and did something. They must have done something, about 5 or 6 writers. Right. Groucho never met the contestants before the show, so there was never. It wasn't scripted in that sense. They weren't working off any kind of rehearsed material, but the contestants were prepped. Groucho was prepped. And these writers, and I guess it would be only fair to name some of them. Howard Harris, who had written some material for A Night in Casablanca and Copacabana, so he sort of had Groucho weighed off. A guy called Ed Doc Tyler, who was a fertility specialist, but who was also wrote jokes. A guy called Elroy Schwartz, who was a licensed hypnotherapist specializing in past life regression, and also a joke writer for Bob Hope, and several others. So I think it's in As Long as They're Laughing, isn't it, where it's the analogy is made with scaffolding. They provide a scaffolding that is there to catch Groucho if he needs it, but if he doesn't need it, then so much the better.
Yeah, I mean, when you listen to a show, it's hard to not notice at least 3 or 4 jokes every episode.
It's pretty obvious, yeah.
But for the most part, it's a fine line, and it's certainly it's not distracting or bothersome or makes you think less of Groucho's ability.
In a way, it's the inverse of the old way it was, right? It used to be that Groucho worked with a script, but seized opportunities to ad-lib and be spontaneous as they came up. And You Bet Your Life is kind of the opposite. He worked without a script in casual conversation, but seized any opportunity to work in a prepared piece of material.
By the way, Matthew, you were mentioning the writers before. That Ed Doc Tyler was apparently quite a character. He left under some nefarious circumstances and didn't sign the contract to allow the episodes he worked on to be rerun.
He left after the 1953-1954 season, yeah. And I spoke to his daughter, and she said Groucho kept his distance from the writers as he wanted his fans to think he ad-libbed all his lines. I only saw him once or twice when my dad took me to the show's set, but my impression of him was that he was kind of sour and unpleasant, not funny, and not interested in socializing with the adults, and certainly not with the kids. But Bernie Smith's daughter, Lucinda Irwin Smith, who I also spoke to, had vastly more rosy memories of the working process. So I think Groucho kind of relaxed over time. But yeah, Doc Tyler made a fairly swift exit.
I've got a quick anecdote about the Tyler family, if I can squeeze it in here somehow. Years ago, I was working for a media production department at the University of Minnesota, and we were trying to, we were auditioning faculty members because we needed a host of a magazine-type show. In other words, a 60 Minutes type show that would feature various aspects of the university. And at one point, Doc Tyler's daughter, who is a historian, I mean, she's a history faculty member at the university. Her name is Elaine Tyler May. And, she came in to audition, and I didn't make the connection. I wasn't even thinking about it, but I was in the room. And my supervisor was, grilling her in a very nice fashion, but, trying to figure out if she had the chops for this. And suddenly, Elaine Tyler May said, well, I'm very accustomed to being in front of a camera because I grew up in Hollywood, and my father used to take all these home movies of us in 16 millimeter. And suddenly the index cards in my brain, the Rolodex file in my brain is flipping around these cards. I'm thinking, Elaine Tyler May. And suddenly I jumped up and I said, you're Doc Tyler's daughter. And this effectively derailed the interview because I was only interested in hearing about Doc Tyler and You Bet Your Life. And I remember my boss, Mary, just looking aghast at me with her jaw dropped. It's like, what is this guy doing? But I got it out of my system after about 2 hours, I guess. But before she left the room, I said, hey, guess what? I collect You Bet Your Life film. And I think I've got about 4 of the shows that are not in syndication that your father worked on, Ed Tyler. Mm-hmm. And I said, how about if we have these transferred to VHS tape and then you can see them? And she said, great. So that's how that came about. What an odd coincidence, though. I never would have expected this. Yeah. By the way, she didn't get the part. Probably because of me.
I can't remember how I got in touch with her. Was it you that put me in touch with her?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm so delighted that you did, Matthew. Thank you so much.
When did that happen, Jay? How many years after You Bet Your Life was that audition, that encounter?
Well, let's see now. I would say that would be around 1994, something like that.
Yeah, so it's a good 40 years.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
Oh, yeah.
So there are a couple of full seasons from the middle of the show's run which were never put into syndication and never rerun because of this contractual issue. What years were those?
Well, I think Matthew mentioned the years, but I've got them here somewhere too. Oh, here it is. Doc Tyler worked on the show from October of 1950 to September of 1954.
Wow, that's quite a hole in the middle of that donut.
Yeah, it's a shame because these are no longer. You might find them on YouTube.
And I have to believe whatever issues there were back then, those contracts have lapsed, maybe with his death or whatever. But I'm sure those episodes would be available if they exist.
Yeah, that would be nice. Well, I mean, at this late date, I can't imagine anybody doing that, but it would have been a wonderful thing if they had been part of that package that was eventually syndicated. But of course, the syndicated prints were sabotaged for reasons that we may or may not go into. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we're missing that content by and large, or at least if you're watching it in syndication, you're missing it.
So according to Goodell, and if you believe his telling of this, he invented the rerun. Apparently, at the end of the first season of You Bet Your Life, he and Groucho sat down, and they were a bit worried about what show ABC was going to replace it with over the summer, which was the common practice of the day. And Goodell got to thinking, why don't we take the best episodes from our first season and run them over the summer? And he went to ABC and proposed this, and they thought he was out of his mind, frankly. But eventually he was able to convince them. And during that first summer, the audience grew. And by the time the show entered its second season, it was a big hit, at least by ABC standards. Eventually, it landed at CBS Radio and now is one of the major networks. And when CBS started running it, it became one of the top shows on radio. It was a bona fide hit. And that meant it was ripe for TV. And Groucho and Goodell knew this, and they had all the leverage, and they listened to all the networks, fawn over them and try and get on their good side and offer the most money and whatever else. And that led to a fascinating incident at a party one night. Who wants to tell that story?
It was at somebody's house. It wasn't
Gummo's. I think it was Gummo's.
Hey, well done. Yes, Bob. Gummo's house. And Bill Paley arrives first. And I believe an executive from NBC was arriving late. He was tardy because of a flight issue. The flight was delayed. So basically, Paley had this great opportunity to get this deal closed before NBC had a shot. And Groucho went into Gummo's bathroom for the usual reason, I assume. And Paley had the chutzpah, if you want to call it that, to follow Groucho into the bathroom, shut the door. So that part was good, that he shut the door. And, according to R.C. and others, he basically cornered Groucho and said, I think as a quote, he said, we Jews should stick together. And Groucho, well, for one thing, Sarnoff was, working at NBC. But Groucho, appropriately enough, took great offense at this ploy of Paley's. And the decision went in favor of NBC, not entirely due to this, but it certainly was a factor. And eventually, the guy from NBC showed up, and eventually they got the contract.
Are we sure it wasn't the fact that he came into the bathroom with Groucho? Maybe that's what turned him off. That would be the deal breaker for me.
I hate it every time this happens to me, by the way.
That's why in my mind I had it happening in a public bathroom, because it's slightly less, egregious a violation.
Creepy. Yeah.
I find it really significant that Groucho would have objected to that kind of tribalist appeal, and I think it speaks well of him. But yeah, somebody follows you into the bathroom in a private home, closes the door, and says, listen, we got to stick together. I mean, wouldn't you want to get as far away as you could from that person?
Yeah.
So the series ended up on NBC TV, and Goodell, as before, insisted that it be done ahead of time, where it could be edited and get the best possible half hour. And the only way to accomplish this in that era was to do it on movie film. Videotape was still years away. So they went to a great expense of shooting every episode on multiple 35 millimeter cameras where it could be edited. And I don't know if they realized it at the time, but this had the benefit of giving them high quality episodes that could be rerun indefinitely into the future. They weren't beholden to low quality kinescopes, which nobody wanted to rerun.
Yeah, we are incredibly lucky, actually.
Yeah, indeed. And according to Robert Dwan, this predated Lucy.
Yeah.
So they came up with this thing on their own. And he went on to say that because I think they ultimately had 7 cameras, that's where the expense came in. Mm-hmm. Even though the quiz itself gave away relatively low amounts of money, it was a very expensive show to produce for that reason. They had to shoot so much film.
I didn't know until fairly recently that the series continued on radio for many years after it had started on TV. And what makes it even more interesting is the fact that there were totally separate edits done for the radio and TV versions. The TV version could obviously have more visual stuff on it and stunts and so forth, while I guess the radio version stuck more to the interaction between Groucho and the guests. I'd love to do a side-by-side comparison of the same episode, how it was edited for radio and for TV. Have any of you come across the different versions?
No.
That's very interesting because, stupidly, I'd always assumed that they were completely separate shows in the way that over here, Hancock's Half Hour was running on radio and television at the same time, but they were completely different programs. And I've just, with that model in mind, I had an idea that they were doing a radio show and a television show. I didn't realize they were actually the same shows on both media.
It's also be interesting to take some of those unedited episodes, the handful of complete performance recordings that we have, and you know, Bob, you could do your own edit. You could. How would you have broken down that hour to a half hour? You Bet Your Life. Mm-hmm. Isn't it surprising sometimes how visual the show was, the TV version? One of the best things about it, I think, is Groucho he's in front of an audience and he kind of has freedom to do what pops into his head. It's amazing how often he gets up and dances or demonstrates something, or he's constantly prodding the contestants to perform if they have performance ability or even if they don't. In a way, sometimes it turns into this Groucho-hosted talent show.
Those were the highlights for me. I used to stay up late at night when it was syndicated. That's when I really began to get into You Bet Your Life. And any time that, Melinda, for example, I clocked via Bernie Smith's credit listing information the number of times that Melinda was on the show, if I can say her name, 9 times. I think Dwan says in his book, we're really publicizing his book. I hope it's still in print. But he claims that she was on every season. Well, not the case, because among these 9 times that I identified, there were a couple of seasons when she was on twice. But I was going to say, it's those special, unexpected little production pieces, if you will, that to me are the highlights. And also that's, I think, why they needed that 7th camera, because you never knew when Groucho was going to jump off the podium and pick up somebody and start dancing with her, and occasionally dancing with Fenneman or what have you, and those are really really special moments for me anyway.
Fenneman. You said the secret word, Jay. Let's talk about Mr. George Fenneman for a bit here. Tell us a little about him.
Fenneman was originally hired, I believe, to simply do the on-air commercials for radio.
Right.
And Groucho took a liking to him for some reason, and during one of the tapings, I call it tapings, but they were recordings on record, and he got off the podium and disrupted one of the commercials, I believe, and he just took a shining to Fenneman for some reason. He just thought he was, as we characterize it, the perfect foil, because he was straight on all 4 sides, I believe Groucho said. And eventually the guy that was the announcer, Slattery, was that his name?
Yeah.
He was dropped, and Fenneman took over that part. So he now introduced the show, assisted with the warm-up and so forth. And, of course, then he had to go through the, rather complicated instructions for the quiz originally. Excuse me. So he had to, be there pretty much all the time to introduce the contestants, to explain the rules of the game, to follow along, do the arithmetic, tell them what their score was, and that sort of thing. So he spent a fair amount of time on camera, did he not?
Yeah. Yes. And as you mentioned, he was very determined to keep everything in order, the rules of the game and the scores and everything. When nobody else seemed to care, when Groucho didn't seem to care or know what was going on, George was there to keep things in order.
I think inevitably the person who occupied that role is going to be the obvious foil for Groucho, because by definition that person is a stiff. That person is just there to impart information in an extremely professional way and get off, and that's their job. So obviously Groucho is going to tease at that person to get them to be something other than that, to be more spontaneous, more natural. And I think it was just a wonderful stroke of good fortune that, having started on that process with Fenneman revealed himself to be such a good sport and so charming, and so willing to go along with it.
Well, why are you here together? Are you sisters?
No.
Brothers? No. Why are you here together?
Mr. Fitterman found out that we're roommates and
I beg your
invited us to be on
pardon?
your show.
What was that?
Mr. Fitterman.
Mr. Fitterman? What show is he connected with, huh? You don't mean Rademacher, do you? Who is Mr. Fitterman? Where did you meet him?
We simply met him and he invited us to be on your show.
You don't mean... You mean Fenneman?
That's right.
Oh. Does he tell you his name was Fitterman?
I can't pronounce it.
He's trying to hide something, huh? You mean he found out... well, how did he find... Why did he want you here? He found out what?
We're both so much alike in so many ways.
You were roommates. Is
Yes.
that what you said before? Roommates? Where's Fitterman? Get him out here. Hey, Fitterman, come out here. You changed your name, I see, huh? Why did you do this, George?
I didn't do anything, honest.
They told me that you said that your name was Fitterman. Now, you must have been doing it for some reason. When I use a different name, there's a reason for it. And I'm sure there is when you do it. Aren't you a married man?
Up till now, I was, yes.
Then why do you use a nom de plume?
I didn't.
How did you find out they were roommates?
Well,
George, I'm not criticizing you. I just want to know what technique you use, that's all.
There's not many people you could tell that Groucho actually liked, but you could tell he liked Fenneman. They had a very good-natured rapport, and they became friends, and Fenneman was a part of Groucho's life till the very end, and you can't say that about everyone.
Fenneman seems to give Groucho some currency in the era of You Bet Your Life. You know, it's interesting how often Groucho's posture on the show is that of an old man. He's not really that old yet. He's in his 60s during the run of You Bet Your Life. But he presents himself very much as a figure from an earlier era. He tells old vaudeville stories. A lot of the humor is at his own expense in terms of being, aged and out of touch. And Fenneman is such a 1950s figure, the way he comes across on You Bet Your Life. His look, his sound, everything about him. He's like sort of a perfect 50s generic American male. And he sort of brings Groucho into what was then current day.
You know, when you see the episodes uncut or you look online, you'll find that Groucho did commercials for DeSoto. Very often these were elaborate film pieces. They're interesting. Sometimes there's music or animation. They're worth seeking out.
I don't like seeing him in that sort of subservient position of sell. You know, I'd rather he made fun of the sponsor than was actually plugging away for them. There is a nice exchange with Miriam in one of her letters from April of 1953, where she has obviously said to him that he comes across as insincere in those moments, and he wrote back and said, "It's true what you write about me seeming insincere in the commercials. Actually, I am, but they feel that it has an extra value over Fenneman's mouthing this drivel, so I'm obliged to do it. I do it willingly but badly, and as you say, I guess it's pretty evident on the screen."
Well, the familiar phrase, to us anyway, "tell him Groucho sent you," had everything to do with those commercial spots. Mm-hmm. Because he was advising, obviously, the audience to run out and see your DeSoto Plymouth. Why is it never Plymouth? It's always Plymouth. Run out and see your DeSoto Plymouth deal tomorrow, and when you do, tell him Groucho sent you. And some of those original commercials that we refer to harken back to Horse Feathers to some extent, because they have him opening the DeSoto Plymouth icon, which is circular. So he opens it as if it's what do they call those windows in a speakeasy door? So it reminds me, of course, of the swordfish scene. But at least the writers of that particular spot had a good time with it. Whether or not Groucho did, I don't know. I don't think he did, as Matthew says.
It's funny that during his radio career, outside of You Bet Your Life, mocking commercials was a pretty standard bit for him. I guess he did some of that stuff in the films too, like in The Barn and Monkey Business, doing radio commercials. But, all those, like on The Big Show with Tallulah Bankhead, those Plebo Company spots that Groucho did, those are kind of a high point of his non-You Bet Your Life radio work, I think. And so to hear him doing these genuine commercials with something that is, I guess, at least trying for sincerity, is strange. It seems out of character for him. And I guess we know from the letter that Matthew quotes that Groucho was aware of it and was uncomfortable with the sort of the chasm between what his persona, even this version of his persona, should be doing and what he was called upon to do by the sponsors.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of the sponsors, that's actually a good segue. I have a question. Actually, it's a rhetorical question. Now, as we all know, so many of the existing versions of the episodes that we have available to us today are these Best of Groucho episodes, with that title. That means they are reruns that were prepared after the show went off the air. And for whatever reason, they felt compelled to get rid of all the DeSoto logos, even though DeSoto didn't even exist anymore. But they had to get rid of all those logos, which meant blowing up shots and awkwardly framing things, which made the show very unattractive. But my question is, why didn't anyone have the foresight to see that this might be an issue down the line? I don't get it.
What would have been the harm in leaving them in? I mean,
yeah,
why
Smith,
not just leave them in?
Yeah, he brought that up over lunch once, Bernie Smith, and he said, "Who cares about a sign on the podium that says DeSoto? They don't even make DeSotas anymore."
Right.
Well, he used to have a 16 millimeter print of a repeat show, and it begins with Fenneman looking at the camera, explaining that it is a repeat show. Yeah. But then you go, and this is from the Groucho show, which was the final season. And hey, guess what? The advertisements for Lever Brothers products are there on the podium. So I always thought that this business of blowing up the image in order to avoid the product signage and to put the little black dot over the microphone where it said NBC.
Yeah.
I always thought they had done that with the more recent syndication, which I would speculate was in the 80s.
I don't know. I think it's been like this ever since I started watching the show in the 70s. I only remember it being this way. I think what you're talking about is a rerun that happened while the show was still in first run production, which could have aired pretty much as it did originally with the ads intact. But once the show went into syndication, those were the ones that had to be tweaked and fixed for the sponsor ads. So anyhow, why don't we move on and let's talk about, let's go backwards. Let's talk about our first experiences with You Bet Your Life, how we all discovered it. We all knew the brothers and the movies before we knew the TV show, but for millions of people, a generation of people, they knew Groucho first and foremost from You Bet Your Life. And, we shouldn't discount that, but why don't we all talk about how we first discovered the show? Noah, why don't you start us off?
Fairly early on in my explorations of the Marx Brothers, I bought an audio cassette tape that I had randomly found at some store somewhere. It was a rack of old-time radio tapes, the Jack Benny show, the Burns and Allen show. And one of them was, actually all it said on the packaging was Groucho Marx, with a picture of the You Bet Your Life Groucho. And this tape had 2 episodes of the radio You Bet Your Life. And for years, that was all I had of You Bet Your Life. I listened to those 2 episodes a lot and know them by heart. And then I think I started to, find it on television, and it was a whole other dimension of him. I think I thought then the same thing I think about it now, which is that it's a very ordinary game show, but it has this outstanding feature, which is an opportunity to observe Groucho as a living organism. That's what is good about it. And I think I kind of had its number right away. Like, oh, well, this is great. A half hour of just listening to Groucho talk and seeing him react to things. And he's one of the most fascinating people who ever lived. And, this is a chance to observe him. And it seems, compared to the Marx Brothers films, like observing him in his natural habitat somehow, even though that's not quite accurate. But just watching him kind of exist, you could watch him think. I think that's its great value.
Jay?
I have a very dim memory in general, but in terms of You Bet Your Life, I have a very dim memory of that when originally aired. I seem to remember coming across it once and actually being frightened by the show. This strange duck dropping down, and this peculiar kind of odd-looking man with the mustache and the cigar. However, when they syndicated it locally, I used to stay up every night. It was on at 1 o'clock, and I'd be sitting there with my reel-to-reel tape deck, taking copious notes. I think this is about the time of the Marx Brotherhood fan club that I started. Some listeners may have heard of it. But that's what led to me writing to John Goodell and Bernie Smith. And I'll tell you one thing. I'm so delighted that I met 3 of the principals involved with You Bet Your Life. I met the producer, John Goodell. I met the head writer, Bernie Smith. And I met the duck. Because Bernie was keeping the duck in his daughter's old closet. So when I was over at his place looking over the You Bet Your Life records, he suddenly said, "You want to meet the duck?" So I went into the room. He handed me Ducky. He took a photograph of me holding Ducky. And everything was Ducky as far as I was concerned. Oh, can you delete that joke later?
Did he stick you with the bill, Jay?
I could, but I won't. Okay, now Matthew, I'm sure, has a totally different story.
Yeah, I first saw it, as I've said before, it never ever aired over here. It wasn't shown until a couple of years ago on some obscure satellite channel, if they're still even called that now. We never had it. But I first saw a 5-second clip of it, weirdly enough, in a documentary film called This Is Elvis. I'd already become a Marx Brothers fan, probably not long before. And it was a clip of the program, and it was a woman who was obsessed with Elvis. And she said, I have locks of his hair. And Groucho said, you have locks of his hair? Do you have any cream cheese to go with it? And it sort of took me a beat of 3 to even realize it was Groucho. And it was suddenly, oh my God, that's Groucho. Mm-hmm. And that was my absolute discovery of You Bet Your Life. I had no inkling of it until then. So I then went away and looked it up and found out about it. And then I would have seen some clips on the Nutshell documentary and the other documentaries. But I didn't see the program until I got DVDs of them. So probably no more than about 10 years ago.
So do we know the reason why the show was never run there, either first run or in reruns?
It was never run unfortunately, because it was this curious hybrid of a comedy program and a quiz show. We imported comedy programs. We had I Love Lucy. We had The Benny Show. But quiz shows were felt to be not importable because the frames of reference would be meaningless. So if there was a hit quiz show, like What's My Line, for instance, which was very big over here too, we would make our own version of it. But the problem with You Bet Your Life is the game wasn't worth doing our own version of it. And the fact that it was really just an excuse for Groucho to be funny, unfortunately, it fell between stools. We did do a version in the mid '60s. We brought him over. Unfortunately, not a hit. But the episode I've seen is extremely good.
Yeah, we talked about this a few episodes ago. It's just really fascinating. Groucho did a series of shows based on You Bet Your Life over in the UK, and by all accounts, it was a total disaster. However, the one episode that we've heard, it's exceptional. And it just shows perhaps how the show could have evolved into the 1960s.
Apparently, by the way, that's on the Shout Factory collection.
Yeah,
and
that's where we talked about it. Yeah.
And apparently, that's the only extant print.
He did 13, didn't he? I think.
I think so. Yeah.
The ratio of saved to lost in British television in the 60s is terrifying, unfortunately.
I think I've mentioned this before. I first became aware of You Bet Your Life through this record album. It was called The Golden Age of Comedy. It came out, I think, in the early 70s. And it had all these clips of the famous radio comedians from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And, it actually has my favorite version of Who's On First. So maybe you guys should seek it out for that. But it had a short excerpt from You Bet Your Life, and I really enjoyed it. And this was before the TV show had its big resurgence.
You say you're married, huh?
That's right.
What does your husband do for a living?
He's a thread booker for Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company.
He's a what?
A thread booker.
Well, give him my congratulations. What is a thread broker?
I don't know.
Don't you know what your husband does? What does he tell you?
Nothing. He keeps away from my pots and pans, and I keep away from his tires.
Well, that's very shrewd, especially if you don't want to get run over.
It's really true, the point that you were making earlier, Bob, about how in some ways Groucho, or among some audiences, Groucho is much more famous as the host of You Bet Your Life than as the comedian of the stage and screen. And and I guess it's because of the mass audience of television and the fact that the heyday of You Bet Your Life is already like 20 years or more later than the best of the Marx Brothers films. But a lot of people in my father's generation, my father was born in 1949, so his childhood lines up perfectly with the first original run of You Bet Your Life. And that's who Groucho was to him. It was kind of surprising to him later to realize, there was this whole Marx Brothers thing that happened long before Groucho was a game show host. And I've heard Dick Cavett, or read Dick Cavett, making that same point too, that he knew Groucho's voice from the quiz show and caught up with the films later.
And as I mentioned earlier, and Matthew goes into great detail about this in his book, Groucho was just so extremely proud of his success here. It was really something that he had been striving for since his earliest days on stage, this big success on his own.
And you also get the sense, at least until, the big Marx revival, when he's being interviewed, when You Bet Your Life is still current, he absolutely thinks this is his legacy, that this is what he's going to be leaving behind, is that he's going to be the You Bet Your Life guy. And in a footnote, back in prehistory, he was a film comedian and a stage comedian,
Also, this man was very insecure about his finances.
Yeah.
And this thing, it ran for 14 seasons, as we pointed out. And he suddenly had every reason to feel financially secure.
And financially secure without ever having to travel, without ever having to go through an arduous rehearsal and blocking experience. It was a very easy gig for him.
And as you say, apart from those wonderful occasions when he does feel the need to get up and be physically spontaneous, not even physical. I mean, he actually says that one of the best things about the job for him is that it's sitting down.
Yeah, he actually had a suit jacket that was tailored for sitting down.
Yeah, you want to get the little flap in the back by the neck. Yeah.
It is true, though, that I've noticed that any time on You Bet Your Life, anytime the Marx Brothers do come up as a subject, the audience reacts, very enthusiastically to it. I mean, the Marx Brothers were still this beloved act, and I guess it would be, more the people in the audience who weren't too young. I don't think it was that young an audience anyway. I remember, times when Groucho would be talking to an Italian person and would throw in a half-hearted reference like, my brother Chico's Italian, and the audience would go crazy for that.
Well, speaking of the brothers, one of the regrets I have is that they did not take part in the show more than they did. Harpo did appear, but that was near the very end, almost one of the very last episodes, and that was only to promote his book, and he was only on for a minute or two. Chico was seen occasionally in the audience.
And on the payroll.
Right, that might have been one time that they just reused the footage. I don't know how many times he was actually there. But word has it that Harpo and Chico were there and did take part in the audience warm-ups and did do a lot of hijinks with Groucho. So it's just surprising that they were never really brought onto the show more than they were. And not only them, but Zeppo, and particularly Gummo. Wouldn't that have been wonderful to bring Gummo on as a contestant and have
as a contestant,
with him?
Yeah, that would have been great.
He had Harry Ruby on. I just saw that one recently.
I got some dates for you. He was on that show twice. He was on wonderfully on June 14, 1956. That's the show where he sang with Groucho. No, he played the piano and sang with Groucho the Window Cleaner song.
Groucho. Harry and I go to many parties together, and we always sing this song. I don't know the words too well, but we're going to sing this together. Try it anyhow.
Window cleaning's not a job to rave about.
It won't get you in the Hall of Fame.
No one ever looks at you or points you out.
And the papers never print your name. But it's interesting just the same. Every morning we begin on the outside looking in. You bet we see a lot while we massage the window pane. Out the window we would go if we told the things we know, but we're too wise to scandalize, from gossip we refrain.
As an occupation, our vocation may be very low and mean.
We are not afraid to work. We're paid to keep the windows clean. We know lots of married men who'd be single once again if we told what we see while we massage the window pane.
Polishing the glasses for the masses isn't what you call ideal.
Even though it's not a cinch, it's got a lot of sex appeal. But we don't want to advertise. Why should we put husbands wise? If they were wise, there'd be no guys massaging window
And for years, I thought that was the only episode, but there is a more obscure episode on June 8, 1961, where he appeared. And of course, on both occasions, as was practically always the case with celebrities, whatever he won was donated to charity. But what a kick for any Marx Brothers fan who happens to be watching You Bet Your Life, and on comes Groucho's dear friend, Harry Ruby.
Just to rewind to Chico, though, Jay, I think you were about to use one of my all-time favorite phrases, creamy prom.
Watch your language, would you? Don't you realize there are some children turning off this podcast? Of course, they would have done that anyway. But... Well, yes. Marx Brothers fans who are familiar with You Bet Your Life are probably aware that Harpo and Chico were hired to do these, pretty amusing commercials for Creamy Prom, which was a soap, was it not?
Shampoo, I think, wasn't it? Or
was it a shampoo?
It was a hair product, I think, yeah.
A hair product. Of course, I wouldn't know anything about hair products. Except for Rogaine, possibly. But yeah.
You look like Jack Benny right now.
Well, for heaven's sake. Well, yeah, you adopt these mannerisms. I just can't help it,
there are a couple of stills floating around with Chico and Harpo on the set with Fetterman, horsing around. Maybe these were done during one of those warm-ups that they did. Maybe that's why Groucho isn't there. Jay, do you have any idea when or why these were done?
I don't know. I'm not a wellspring of knowledge here.
Okay, well, let's move on. I guess you can't do a podcast about the history of You Bet Your Life without discussing this, and it's probably why many of you have tuned in, so here we go.
The great Groucho Marx, known for his sharp wit, ad-libbed the following when he asked the contestant why he had 12 children.
Why do you have so many children? Because I like my wife. I like my cigar, too, but I take it out sometimes.
Gentlemen?
Well, for one thing, let's just clear the decks of this obvious problem, which is that very bad recreation of that theoretical moment in history messes up the joke by making it the husband and not the wife being interviewed.
It was definitely the wife because I've seen it.
Yes. I mean, that's the least of the problems, but I decided to stake out that territory. I'll let you guys debunk the larger story. What? But if you were going to the trouble to put that on your record, and why wouldn't you? It's not a difficult joke to get. That's why everyone loves it so much. It's the woman. The man is the cigar. Or unless I have the whole thing wrong. Maybe I've been doing it wrong all these years.
I was going to say, I'm not going to touch that line with a 10-foot pole.
It's not the length of the pole, Jay.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so basically there's this rumor legend sprung up from somewhere at some time that Groucho said this exchange to a woman. Why do you have so many kids?
Mrs. Story, I think.
Mrs. Story, yeah. Like my cigar, but I take it out occasionally. And he was adamant that he never said it, and he said, I wish I had, because it's a great line, and it's so out of character for Groucho to say he didn't do something that he did. I mean, it would be the most unprecedented reversal of the Groucho we know for him to not take credit for something he did do. So I think the fact that it was emphatically saying no, it's a great line, but it's a myth. Is kind of or should be the last word on it. Unfortunately, the pool has been muddied subsequently, partly because Bernie Smith, I think it was certain that it did happen, and then he kind of infected Robert Dwan with the same certainty, but also because, unfortunately, in that book, Secret Word is Groucho. Yeah. Suddenly, Groucho does take credit for it, but I think that's easily explained in that this is Groucho at the very end of his life. It's heavily ghosted by Hector Arce, and he probably wasn't even aware that there was a controversy over it, and he just assumed it was true. So he put it in there. He put it in there as Groucho confirming it. Maybe Groucho's memory even had gone a bit by then, and he thought he had said it, but nobody has ever been able to prove it. Nobody has ever been able to produce it. And all the people who say, yes, it's true because I saw it or because I heard it, are obviously wrong, because it was never broadcast. It was a radio show, so the 50% of people who are certain they saw it are wrong by definition. But also it would have been edited out. So the only people, if it existed, who would have heard it were the people in the studio audience. So every time...
And if it had aired, the show would have been canceled, within days. Or Goodell at least would have been fired. Either way, it would have been a national scandal that would be easy to verify these days.
Exactly, yeah. So every time you mention it online or see it mentioned online, you'll see 2 or 3 people who are certain that it happened because they saw it or because they heard it. It's an interesting example of what I believe they call the Mandela effect.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And just to clarify, that little clip I played was from an album called Pardon My Blooper, which was part of a series done by this TV producer Kermit Schaefer. Did a bunch of those albums from the 50s through the 70s, and the majority of the clips on these albums were these piss poor recreations, like he just heard. But I guess back then the audience wasn't that sophisticated and didn't know the difference, or maybe they didn't care. But Schaefer really paved the way for Dick Clark in his blooper TV shows. He showed that there really was an audience for this stuff.
Maybe Mrs. Story should be rechristened Mrs. Bogus Story.
I think the story is what's powerful about this, isn't it? I think the reason so many people are under the impression that they saw or heard Groucho say this is because it is a phenomenal joke. I mean, it's a great line. It sounds like him. It sounds like it could be him. It's pleasingly naughty without being, a really objectionable or unpleasant in any way. And it's a kind of, it's a dirty joke that's kind of safe for all audiences. So a lot of kids have heard it. A lot of parents have told it. So a lot of people received it early on. And it's so easy to imagine Groucho saying it. I think
it gives him some street cred.
I don't know if anybody's done any research into the earliest example of when it was claimed. I mean, I wonder if it doesn't date from the time in the same sort of way that A Director Out of Wood dates from A Day at the Races, that it was a kind of semi-promotional journalistic plant. We know that, for instance, his writers, his team of writers, were involved in those napkins, which were for the time pretty risque joke cartoons on napkins that he promoted on the program. So one wonders if maybe one of those writers kind of planted this story in the press that he'd said this joke that they had to cut, and it maybe started there as a semi-official lie, as it were, rather than something that just appeared from midair. And maybe Bernie Smith kind of misremembered because of that.
It does seem to me, while we're criticizing other people's certainty, it is at least vaguely possible that he could have said the line, right? I mean, we don't have that unedited episode. We know Mrs. Story was a prodigiously childhood guest. And we also know that in those ad-libbing moments, if it theoretically could have been spoken as an ad-lib, Groucho sometimes did that stuff as spontaneous comedians do, with something less than full conscious presence, everything's going by quickly and you're making jokes, and it even kind of makes sense that a joke like that, which couldn't possibly have been included in the broadcast, maybe everyone who was present kind of edited it out in advance, knowing in those unedited episodes, you hear Groucho sometimes make an off-color joke, and he starts saying things like clip, 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 like indicating that he knows it's not going to make it to the air.
But that's the thing, though, isn't it? Is that those were saved. I mean, I think it would have ended up on one of those reels. And also,
it's actually in that date range, isn't it? The Mrs. Story episode is conspicuously missing from that set of unedited episodes.
And also, it would have just got such a laugh. It would have absolutely killed. I cannot think of any good reason why Groucho would have then said, no, I didn't say it. I think it's probably more likely that it was something, that was written by the team as a prepared joke that they obviously knew he couldn't use. And it's kind of slipped out that way.
Yeah, I think that's about as good an explanation as any. Perhaps they were just kicking it around in the writer's room and had a good laugh, knowing that this would never fly. But they started telling people, oh, what, it would have been funny if Groucho had said this. And then somehow it just, took on a life of its own.
Yeah. And it got out as kind of he did, but it was cut.
Yeah. Now, I hate to go down this road, but I think we're obligated to talk about the fact that You Bet Your Life has been rebooted a couple of times. A current version is running with Jay Leno. And in the past, there has been one with Bill Cosby, and then one with Buddy Hackett. And the thing that they miss here is that they got these guys who are great joke tellers, but they're not necessarily quick-witted and great interviewers, which is what the show needs. They need somebody who's really quick on their feet, and very in the moment. So I don't know. A lot of people say, Groucho's the only one who could do this. The show should never be rebooted. And yeah, none of the ones that have been done so far have been really successful, but I just think it's because they haven't found the right host. And it really can be done because it's a nice format for a good personality. David Letterman would have been great in his day, or maybe even today. But, I just think producers missed the mark in finding the right host.
I think they're just giving themselves an unnecessary burden, really, because the game isn't. There's nothing particularly good about the game. Right. There's nothing good about the format. So if you're just going to use that title, you're asking for trouble. You're asking for exactly the reaction it gets. So just make up a new game. I think.
Yeah. I mean, this latest version, people are going to watch it or not, depending on how they feel about Jay Leno. I mean, the title "You Bet Your Life" really doesn't have any currency these days. They might as well call it the Jay Leno Show or Hanging with Jay. And, and if somebody wants to make the comparison to You Bet Your Life, I mean, that's for them to do. I mean, I don't see what value it brings to the show by giving it that title. It's not going to help the ratings at all.
Was Groucho the first major comedian to host a game show? That may be as far as pioneering, part of the legacy of You Bet Your Life. I mean, and more recently, we've seen people like Howie Mandel and Drew Carey, host game shows, not in the same witty, spontaneous, conversational way, but the idea of making a comedian rather than a George Fenneman type, your game show host. Is Groucho the first example of that?
I don't know.
Seems like it.
I can't think of anybody else.
Could be.
He certainly brought a level of irony to the idea of being a TV host that wasn't there before. And it seems to me the Groucho's television legacy is more felt in the late night talk show hosts.
Yeah.
I mean, you could draw a line from Groucho to people like Letterman. Stephen Colbert is totally unlike Groucho in manner, but some people have pointed out to me that he has the same kind of spontaneity and a similar wry detachment. It's funny that Groucho's biggest job, and in some ways his longest held and most famous job, was game show host. He just doesn't fit the template in any way, nor is he ever described that way.
Anyhow, before we move on here, anything else to add before we get on to our special treat?
Yes, I'd just like to say congratulations to Nick Santamaria, a long-term friend of the podcast, and Noel Vaughan, who I met for the first time in person last week. He took her to Switzerland and he proposed marriage to her on the steps outside Charlie Chaplin's house while an orchestra was playing the theme from Limelight. I personally would have gone for something romantic, but that was what he decided on. And she said yes. So congratulations, Nick and Noel.
Wonderful.
Congratulations.
Congrats, Nick. That's fantastic news. I don't know how to follow that, but I'm going to try. So we've been running these Jay Hopkins interviews for the last couple of years. We've been running them
to death.
Yeah. And we thought we were done with them, and you thought we were done with them. But nope, there is one last interview that's sat in the archives. Now, to come clean, Jay had given this to me a while back and said, Bob, I don't think it's really listenable. I don't think it's audible. You probably can't make it out. Well, I don't recommend you running it. So I took his word for it and never did. But it's an interview with Bernie Smith, the head writer for You Bet Your Life. And I decided, I'm going to listen to it just so I could get some insight and maybe help prepare for this podcast. And I sat down with it last night, and it's totally fine. It's a lot of fun, and we're going to run it for you now. It takes place in a restaurant. Jay and Bernie are enjoying a nice meal as they're talking, and you certainly hear the glasses clanking and dishes making noises and waiters serving meals and taking orders and everything. And you know what? It's fine. It's just atmosphere. Think of it as my dinner with Bernie. Okay? Just close your eyes and imagine you're at the table with them enjoying a bowl of matzo ball soup or something, and just enjoy. Okay? Jay, you have anything to add to this?
Well, I'm so delighted that the tape survives in whatever form, because it's a rare recorded example of me actually fighting over who's going to pay the check. Usually I don't even offer, you see. Also, I should mention that this was recorded in Hamburger Hamlet, no less. Very exciting. Yeah. And it was on March 19, 1979. And I think by now my soup is cold. We'll find out.
Were a great many of the early quiz shows crooked? I know the $64,000 question.
The big ones for the big money. The $64,000
and the $64,000 challenge. Those were the two big ones. They swore to me that they were not crooked. I know Ralph's story very well. He was the MC on $64,000 challenge, and Hal March, whom I also used to know before he died, was the MC on.
That's right.
$64,000.
I think Jack Berry took over.
Yeah. No, he took over on the
Pyramid?
No, the tic-tac-toe one.
Oh, gee, I don't know what that is.
You know the one I mean. The one that the guy got into all the trouble on. Mark...
Well, I guess they deserve that fleeting fame.
That's another story, which I'll tell you in a minute. But Ralph and Hal both swore to me that there was nothing crooked on those shows. However, they used to come to us for good contestants.
That's right.
There was a jockey particularly named Pierce. I can't think of his first name. Jockey. I think he was either a jockey or a baseball. I think he was a jockey. Anyway, he had a lot of fun on our show, and he made friends with our people. And then when $64,000 question called and said, "Have you got anybody?" and mentioned this guy, and so they took him back there. And then when he came back here, he told us that they gave him a little book about that thick. And they said the answers to all the questions are somewhere in that book.
Really?
So that was it. But they never got caught, really.
No.
What was the famous one that Mark Van Doren?
Ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
I guess
ready?
so. Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Well, I like the grilled cheese and bacon deluxe.
Okay.
And I'm going to have the lobster bisque.
The cold?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
What the hell was the name of that? Mark Van Doren was the young guy that he was the first one that got caught. He admitted it. And he was tried. I think he was, I don't know if he ever spent any time in jail or not. Well, it was a tic-tac-toe.
I think Marion Pollack mentioned Pollack. That's wrong in both counts. She mentioned somebody that, as you say, came to your show first, and she knew there was something funny that when he kept winning on the other show because he just was not that bright.
We had a lot of them that came from our show. Well, anyway, the producer of this show that I'm talking about, that was the big one that got in trouble, was High's brother, Alfred.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he used to work on our show. He ran the teleprompter, or in those days they call it the visualizer, which was a thing that I kind of invented.
I want to ask you about that because it just seems so astounding to me that the audience could attend his show every week and still the legend persisted that he didn't have any jokes written.
Well, it was a hell of a lot of it written, believe me.
I know it.
But you know there's a machine in a bowling alley that projects a score?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we used. I decided that would be great for us. And we had it set up over the contestant's shoulder. So I'm Groucho. I'm looking at you. You're the contestant. Right in back of you, over here, about another 10 feet, is the screen. It's at an angle. The audience can't see it. Nobody down there can see it. It's all draped in black. Nobody knows what it is. The operator, a guy named Chuck... what the hell was his name?
I should have brought a list of credits.
This is a long time ago.
Thanks.
Anyway, he was in there all by himself. He was on the show from the beginning, and Groucho never saw him, never knew him, wouldn't admit he existed. And yet he was the guts of the whole thing. So I'm standing behind Groucho in the wings with earphones on. I'm talking to Chuck and controlling Groucho through this machine. Everything was written, as much as we could write, on acetate sheets, put down here, and then it was projected up on the screen so that Groucho, looking over the contestant's shoulder, can read it. And then I control Groucho by the speed or whatever I put up on the screen.
I get a big kick when I watch these prints that I have. I've seen them several times. I can pretty much tell, I think, which jokes are set up because
he reads terribly. When you know him, he's a terrible reader. You can tell what you can tell the ones he has no confidence in. The ones that he understands sound like this ad lib. But I would say of the total show, each week, I would say 80% of it was written or was prepared.
Really?
80%.
It's amazing. And then the editing comes in there.
And we overshot by, as much as a half hour sometimes. Really? Almost 100%.
So how long would you say an average show lasted in the studio?
In the studio?
Yeah.
Oh, I would say the average show, I would say 45 minutes.
Oh, really?
And then we'd throw away 15 minutes.
I see.
That was done to give Groucho complete freedom in doing what he wanted to do. He's a genius. He had an insight somewhere. He would smell something funny or something, and then something coming up, and he would go after it. And he may get nowhere for 3-4 minutes, all of which was cut out and thrown away.
Right.
So that when you saw it on the air, all you saw was a little bit leading up to it, the answer, and his joke. But he would never give up. And that's why we were recorded, and that's why we had Bob Dwan, who supervised all the editing. Wrote half of the show after it was all performed.
Yeah. It's probably not fair to judge it by the syndicated versions, but the editing is fairly obvious to me.
Well, that's not fair to judge it by the syndicated. You see, they take out another
take out 2 or 3 minutes, right? Yeah.
We're allowed on network television in those days. I don't know what it is now. In those days, we were allowed 3 minutes per half hour. Syndicated, you're allowed 6 minutes per half.
That's right.
So they pick up 3 minutes. Well, when you very carefully structure a show, editing and putting it together in the original version for network broadcast, and then somebody has to come along and take another 3 minutes out that doesn't have all of the different angles to cut from, to edit from. All he's got is the one master tape, film. You know the thing has got to suffer. He just can do nothing but act. And that's why a lot of the cuts are obvious, is because he has no choice.
Right.
Another thing that's interesting about the syndicated version, when we did them, for so many years, our sponsor was DeSoto. And we had a big sign on Groucho's podium.
That's right. I've got a lot of those original.
Oh, have you of those?
Yeah.
Where'd you get those?
They pop up, I brought 3 of them with. I was hoping I could show somebody. I don't know if you want to see them. But I've got one from 54, 57, and 60.
That's very interesting because the syndicated versions are a lot different.
I know. When I first saw these from the 60s, I just got them about 2 weeks ago. I was stunned to see that the podium was an outrageous advertisement. It was, I don't remember what it was. It was Tony or something. At that time in the 60s, it was Tony. It was so conspicuous.
Well, this explains what looked like a very bad job of photographing the show. If you'll notice, I'm sure you have, so many times on a 2-shot, the contestants are way over at the edges of the tube, and all you see is just this much, and there's all this space in between.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you'll see the guy, and you'll see Groucho, all you see is his nose.
That's right.
Well, the reason for that is the only way they could get rid of that DeSoto sign was to blow that picture up. So they took those negatives of those original shows and blew them up. And blew the sign out of the picture. Well, obviously, when it's originally shot, the 2 people are here. When you blow it up, they go over here.
Right.
And that's why it looks so strange. It's because it's blown up.
One of the shows I have, I watched many times before I saw it on television. It's the one where I think John Goodell, Bob Dwan, and Jack Meekin are called on by Groucho. And at any rate, there was this contestant who worked in the music industry, and his partner was this gorgeous-looking redhead. And when I saw it on television, it amazed me to see that I couldn't even make out the second contestant until about 5 minutes into the whole interview, because those were all long shots in my print, and you saw something in the background.
Yeah, it's too bad, but that's the way. The only way it could be done.
Yeah.
Of course, there's two ways to look at it. I think that the original syndicators, which I think was NBC, they syndicated it first. After it was through the network, and they own the show, of course. I think they made a mistake in getting rid of that DeSoto sign because they don't make DeSotos anymore. You know, they're not. You know, it wouldn't have been advertising anything. They should have left it in. But
well, sometimes at the close of other shows, you'll see a CBSI, you know, filmed at CBS or whatever, and they leave that in. Why couldn't they leave the NBC and the whole bit? It's just so, they kind of exaggerate the fact that it's there because they have this black dot, you know, on the mic.
Yeah.
And whenever they pan to get rid of something, they have to pan if Groucho moves or something. The dot pans with the camera, and then you see the NBC after all.
That's stupid.
It's really laughable.
That's short-sighted. You know, something reminded me of something that makes a very good story. I can't think what it was. We went past it there.
I want to ask you, too, about that show that Groucho had in England. You were involved with that, I think.
Oh, yeah, I went with it.
Was it kind of like...
terrible experience.
Was it? Was it a British version of You Bet Your Life?
It was practically the same thing. Ron and Groucho and I, we three went over. That's all. And I went over first to get the writers organized and the contestants lined up and everything ready. We had sent over 3 or 4 copies, prints of our show that we thought were pretty good. They were pretty successful there. Well, I left here in L.A. at noon and flew over the pole non-stop and got into London at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was just dead, and the jet lag really got to me. And it bothered me for 2 weeks, really. But when I got there at 6 o'clock in the morning, a gal from ITV, the Independent Television Network, the commercial network in London, was there to meet me with a limousine. And she took me to my apartment, which was a beautiful apartment right on Grosvenor Square across the street from the American Embassy, which is the heart of the West End, heart of Mayfair, with a gorgeous beer house. All furnished with antiques, and it was really something. Anyway, I said, I'm just so damn tired. Before I go down and meet anybody, I got to go to bed. So I did. I went to bed at 6 o'clock when I got up about noon. And I went down to ITV. And over there, they have a pub right in the broadcasting house, in the television studio. And it's kind of the meeting place of everybody connected with the network. And they're all drinking beer, of course, and ale and bitters and whatever. Anyway, I go in there at noon and I meet everybody I'm going to work with. And they're all very pleasant. You know, the English people are fabulous. I just love them. They are really great. Always so courteous and so thoughtful. Anyway, we're getting along fine and everybody's very pleasant. And I said, well, I'm sure you're wondering what we're going to do. And I said, we sent over some copies of the show. Have you seen them? And they all nodded. And I said, well, that's what we're going to do here. Groucho and Britain is the name of it. And I said to one of them, what do you think of them? And this happened to be a girl. I'll never forget the look on her face. And she just kind of, looked at me kind of funny and looked over to a friend and said, well, to be honest with you, we couldn't see anything funny about them at all.
Oh, really?
I knew we were in trouble.
Whose idea was it to do it? Was it...
There was a guy named Elkin Allen, who was a producer of audience participation shows for ITV.
Oh.
He was a big fan of Groucho's, and he'd been over in this country. He'd seen our show, and he followed the rating history, and he knew it was a success, and he thought it would go great in England because the Marx Brothers pictures in England have always been very, very big. They're always playing. They've never stopped playing for 45 years.
At least
and he thought this would be
his sense
good.
of humor is on a par with Groucho's. His sense of humor is on a par with
yeah,
Groucho's.
he understood. He
the average Englander.
Yeah,
maybe.
well, in England, there are two classes. Them that has and them that ain't got it. And them that have don't watch television. Now we get down to them that ain't got it, all they got is television. And pubs. The men go to the pubs. Now we're down to the nitty-gritty. We're down to our audience, but there are a bunch of women who don't have any idea what's going on.
Oh, boy.
All they can understand is somebody getting hit over the head with a rolled-up newspaper or tickled with a feather or the broad, old burlesque type humor. That's all they really understand. Once you get down to their class.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I knew we were in trouble. However, I did the best I could, and I got the writers that they had gotten for me who were just awful.
British writers?
Yeah. I said, I won't go over there. I told Groucho and Dwan when they first asked me, I said, I won't go unless you promise to get me the best writers in England. So Elkin Allen said he had the best writers. Elkin Allen, incidentally, after our show went off, he got fired by ITV, and he went and made millions of dollars in porno flicks.
Great.
Anyway, so we try. So Dwan then comes about a week and a half, 2 weeks later, and I meet him at the airport, 6 o'clock in the morning. I throw my arms around him and I say, Bob, get on that airplane and go home. And I'm going to be right with you. Let's go home. We got no business being here. He said, what's the matter? I said, we haven't got a prayer. They don't know what the hell we're doing.
They wouldn't listen to you, huh?
He said, we're committed, obviously. The contract's are over, son. We have to do it. All right, so then Groucho comes, so we go ahead and do it. The first show, the announcer, the Fenneman part, is a guy who was their leading disc jockey.
Oh, yeah.
Over there, they call him a compere. And it's a far cry from our disc jockeys. This fellow was a wonderful man, but very straight, very square.
Well, Fenneman was a little, too.
He was the squarest man that ever lived. That's why he was a great foil.
I think Groucho said he was square on all four sides.
Oh, yeah, he really was. Anyway, our first show. Oh, by the way, this was after, of course, the crew scandal over here. And over there, they had an outside outfit make up the quiz questions. Groucho never saw, none of us saw them until we're on the air. Now, how's he going to know how to pronounce certain things? You know, everything is a blank to him. And they got a guy with a gun standing there guarding the questions, so nobody gets to him until actually we're on the air. They get oh, terrible. Awful. Anyway, this compere is out there warming up the audience. Now we got out there, all we got are a bunch of old ladies because all their husbands are in the pubs, and that's it. And this is down at Wembley, which is 25 miles north of England.
They used to rely on a lot of celebrities, if I remember right, in England, because they had to get the star appeal rather than the...
You didn't have any celebrities.
You didn't? I thought you did. I guess I'm thinking of Charles the Groucho.
Here we had stars,
yeah, right.
But not in England.
Not in England.
No, all we had was the best we could have was characters. So where the compare is out there warming up the audience for the first show. Now, I have told Groucho They don't understand us at all. The writer, one of the writers that they got from me was a guy named Brad something, right? He was a good act writer, a good joke writer. He knew all the jokes, old jokes, standard jokes. And he was all right. And he said, I don't want you to feel bad or worry, but he said, no American comedian has ever come over here and been a success. Then he goes down the line.
It's funny.
All right, so the comparison out there warming up the audience. Groucho and Juan and I are standing in the wing. Groucho's waiting to be introduced. Well, he can't just stand there. Groucho's got to do something. Being a performer. So he goes over in the wings and he gets a bucket of water. And he just walks now. You know, they have never seen him without the fake mustache and the fake eyebrows.
That's right, yeah.
Or the cutaway coat. So he gets this bucket of water, and right clear in the back end of the stage, he walks across the stage. Doesn't look out. He's got his cigar in his mouth, and he walks across with this bucket of water. And then he compares out front, talking. Nobody recognized him. Not a peep.
Oh, no.
So
he knew right
come back. No, not quite. He comes back. He gets another bucket, puts some water in it. Now he goes back with 2 buckets of water. And he walks across the stage. Not a murmur. Nothing. He comes back, he puts one of the buckets down, he puts the other one on top of his head, and he holds it and he walks across the stage. Not a peep. And he comes back to me and he says, we got a problem. And that was the story of our show in England. The first show went on the air. You can't believe the reviews. Now, there are about 30 dailies in London. The British journalist is a terrible person. They really are awful. And they're all looking for the big chance. They all got their swords out to cut you off. It's just awful. Well, out of the 30 dailies in London, we got 27 reviews that you won't believe. They just cut us all a piece. The other 3 were good. They understood what we were doing.
That's too bad.
Well, that was about time that I left. My family came over, and I took the family, and I went on the rest went around to Europe for a couple of weeks and came on.
Is that a sudden decision due to their reaction?
Yeah.
How long did that last, would you say?
13 weeks.
13. Why would you guess that Tell the Groucho also did not really go anyplace? Just because of overexposure?
Well, after You Bet Your Life had reached the end of 14 years on the air, they were having trouble getting money. They could have no trouble selling it, but they go by rating points in Harvard. And the higher the rating, the more money they get. And they were getting, they said the demographic breakdown was we had a lot of old people. Well, they think old people don't have any money, but they're the ones that have the money, really. Anyway, NBC was very reluctant.
You can tell by the commercials who the audience is.
Yeah, you can always tell.
Selling Geritol and everything else.
That's right. That's correct, that's cool.
And then when
so NBC said, well, we've come to the parting of the ways. Well, we can't do it anymore. So CBS...
they were always ready, right? Because they lost their chance back in 1950.
Goodell's main function with the show was really to sell it and keep it sold.
He was seldom actually there during...
Oh, yeah, he was there for every show.
He was?
Oh, yeah. Well, he was standing there next to me. All he ever did was decide what question to ask on the big question. I had a list of about 5 different big questions. That's all he ever did. But he went on after NBC dropped it, and CBS said, we will buy it if you can make a different show out of it. So the only thing I could think of, Goodell and I had done a little pilot one time for a 15-minute radio commentary show with Rudy Valley, where celebrities in Hollywood had a chance to talk back to critics. Critic can tear a show or a celebrity or an actor completely to ribbons, and he has no recourse. He has no way he can answer. So we were going to give him a platform with this Rudy Valley thing. That never developed. So I said to John, let's do that with Groucho. That's why we call Tell It to Groucho. Anybody that has something to say, a beef of some kind, nobody will listen, come and tell it to Groucho. That was the premise.
I've got a print of the show. I've got a print of the show.
Of the CBS.
And it opens by the announcer saying, from all over America, people are traveling across the country to Tell It to Groucho. And they have this map of the United States behind Groucho.
Well, that was the idea that we had. It just didn't work. People didn't have enough to say. They didn't have nothing they wanted to tell us. People with complaints.
That's surprising.
Well, people with complaints were either complaining about their health, or taxes, money, or things that there was no humor in it. When we dreamed this up, we thought that we could get somebody that was having an argument with the next door neighbor, and we could get the two of them there and, have some fun, but it didn't work that way. So that lasted for 20 shows on CBS, and that was the end of it. Then after that, we went to England.
Well, it's a long time. I don't know of any show that ever lasted any longer than 14 or 15 years. Except maybe,
there were two of them that since. When we went off, we held the record. Ed Sullivan went on for 20 years. Linkletter's House Party for daytime shows went on for 25 years.
Oh, really?
Radio and television.
Also produced by Goodell.
And then the other one was, I think Gunsmoke went for, I think they went for about 20 years. But aside from that, nobody else has done it.
Did Groucho ever have any specific guests that he wanted on his show? I know Harry Ruby appeared on it, but outside of him, I don't know.
Harry Ruby and his daughter?
Excuse me? His daughter?
Melinda.
Oh, yeah, Groucho's daughter, yeah.
And I think that's all. Harpo had a book out, and he wanted Harpo to come on and plug the book. So Harpo came on for 2 seconds.
I've got a copy of that particular portion. And
oh, have you? With Harpo on it?
Yeah. Oh, I was really lucky to get it because I knew the guy that controlled the syndication locally. At any rate, it appears in watching it that Groucho is actually surprised when Harpo comes out, but he must have arranged it.
Oh, yeah.
Groucho looks surprised no matter who comes out, but you know that he's got to know who it is.
Yeah, Harpo was there for a few months, and he was a lovely man. Everybody liked him.
Well, he comes out, and I think he hands Groucho the book, and then he does something to the lady contestant, and then he walks off. And it's kind of disappointing because you think that's it. He's only on for 15 seconds. But luckily, then he comes out after the male contestant comes out and hands him the leg, and then he grabs Fenneman and starts laughing at his own book. And for that part of the show...
Not much you can do with a guy that doesn't talk.
That's right. But you didn't devise anything specific for them to do, right?
Not in his case, but all the rest of it was all prepared. Anytime anybody performed, we had to know and pick that.
You might not remember this, but I've got to ask you something about the Harry Ruby show.
He was on 2 or 3 times.
He was?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, I've only seen the one, I think it was 1956, where he and Groucho sang the window cleaner song.
Yeah.
And right before that, I think Harry says, Groucho, I'll play you a few of my songs. And the only song that we hear him sing is 3 Little Words. Now that must have been edited. He must have ran through several songs.
Yeah.
Can you teach your service?
You want any more?
Oh, no.
No?
Thanks anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
That,
I don't remember.
Something like
well,
that.
they did... no, I don't know if it was on that show, but on some show they did... there's a town called Omaha, Nebraska.
Really? Yeah, because they wrote that.
You heard that? Yeah.
I have heard the song.
Groucho and Ruby wrote it.
Yeah, I know.
town called Omaha, Nebraska, in the foothills of Tennessee. They did that. Now, this was either on that show or another show, but it got on the air, so it wouldn't have been that show.
Thank you very much.
Then he did, the two of them
Could
did...
I pay for it?
No.
I would really.
Another one that Groucho and Ruby wrote called Father's Day.
That's right.
Today, children, is Father's Day, and we're giving him a tie. Groucho and Ruby did that, and they sang it.
Uh-huh.
Now, in the one you saw, it's possible that's the stuff that was cut out. I don't know. But if he was just sitting there playing, and then I wrote, that doesn't make sense. Well, he was on, I know, 2 or 3 times, so...
Oh, I didn't realize that.
He's another wonderful man. I loved Harry.
Yeah, I would have loved him that time.
Yeah, real nice man.
Did Harpo and Chico work as audience warmers?
Yeah. I was there. Knew with anybody.
Oh, really? I thought they came on and... They were on some commercials, I know.
Yeah, well, that's a funny story. Harpo saved his money. And he was very wealthy and lived in a beautiful big home in Palm Springs. He had 4 children, all adopted. They're all wonderful kids.
But Chico...
he went up to Canada and made one commercial. Canada, one time. He comes back to the unemployment office in Palm Springs.
Oh, yeah.
You heard this story? It's a true story. And he applied for his unemployment insurance, and the guy behind the counter says, you write your name? He says, Arthur Marx. He says, when did you last work? He says, 3 months ago. And he says, well, how much were you paid for it? And he says, $14,000. And the guy looked at him and he said, well, how long did you work? And he said, 1 day. And he said, you got paid $14,000. You know, he gives up and he goes and gets the bond. Then another guy that was very, very important to the show and has really been short-sheeted on all of the books about it is Ed Mills. You familiar with his name? Mm-hmm. Well, Eddie really was in charge of all the contestants. He got the He got most of the good contestants. Mm-hmm. Marion did too. Rich Hall did. But Eddie was the best. He was Johnny Goodell's Brotherhood. But on this show, when we started, Eddie would pretend he was the janitor. And he'd come out with white overalls on and a bucket of water and a broom while Groucho was talking. And I can't remember what they did. They did something to show that there was actually water in the bucket. So then they get into an argument, and Groucho starts chasing Eddie, and Eddie's got the bucket of water, and they run through the audience. Groucho chasing Eddie, and they run back on the stage, duck behind the wing for a second, and they change buckets. And Groucho picks up the other one, which has just got confetti in it.
Yeah, right.
And then he throws it out in the audience. So we had all that stuff going on. Well, after 2 or 3 shows, we said, we don't need this.
Yeah.
So that was the end of that. So then Groucho would go out and talk a little bit. And that's all we had.
Used to talk about Melinda and get a little sympathy.
Yeah, and show business, and he always had one joke that he told. He'd say, you know, people are such snobs about humor and jokes. And he'd say, there actually aren't very many jokes. There are new versions of them. And he says, anyway, if a joke is a good joke and you've heard it before, there's no reason why you can't laugh at it again. And he says, you're going to hear a lot of old jokes on this show tonight. I hope you like them. I hope you laugh. He says, for example, I'm sure you've heard the story. And he'd tell it about. He says, the fat woman goes in the pharmacy, and she asks for 10 cents worth of chafing powder. And the clerk says, yes, ma'am, walk this way. She says, if I could walk that way, I wouldn't need the chafing powder. Well, he told that every week for 15 years. And he says, now that's an old joke. He says, how many of you heard it before? And a few answered well. He says, that's a good joke. No reason why you can't laugh at that. That was always a staple.
Yeah, that show had one of the best audiences of any, I think.
Somebody told me that the other day. Somebody said I'd give $1 million to have some footage of just that audience with the short haircuts and the style of dressing and the intelligence on the faces.
Yeah.
It was a good audience. It really was.
But as far as understanding Groucho, I mean, he would have little mannerisms or subtle jokes that I wouldn't think everyone would catch, but there's always a haul in the audience.
They were pretty good. Yeah.
And that was taped, what, Wednesday at
no, it was, we taped it the same time the show was on the air, on Thursday nights.
Oh, really?
I think so. We did it most of the time, not at first. To give the feeling that it was live, you know.
Do you remember the Australian twins? And they came on, and they had a bullwhip, I guess, and that's one of the funniest shows I ever saw.
Really? Did you like that one?
I loved it because he dragged Fenneman out. He said, George, how are you set with the Blue Cross, George? And George thought they were going to whip the cigarette out of his mouth. And finally, Groucho relented, and they did it to themselves. But in listening to the radio version of that particular show, that whole routine is cut.
Oh, that's a very visual thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, what were they? The twins.
That's right.
Oh, I remember that.
And they came over from Australia, and Groucho said, "What are you doing here?" And one of them said, "Well, we thought we could get into pictures." And Groucho said, "Well, the late show at the Pantages starts at 10:30." I love that show.
Yeah, I can't think of their name.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember that very well. Well, all of that kind of stuff we set up. We prepared all of it. In writing the show, you always have to remember that part of the writing was what the contestants said. You know. Now, if I sat down, if we were live on the air, and I'm Groucho, and I'm going to interview you, I don't know what you've got to say on how you met your wife. It may be the dullest half hour in the history of radio.
Right.
And I don't know what you do in your work. I don't know anything about you. So if I just take pot luck, we're not going to get anywhere. I may get a few laughs, but by and large, it's going to be pretty tough. So we just saved him all that trouble. We did it for him. By the time he got the thing, it was all fair down. He knew when he asked, "How did you meet your wife?" or anything like that, he knew something was going to happen. And generally, he knew everything they had to say because I was telling him before at the meeting at his house.
That's right.
So the writing had to be done in such a way that the listener didn't suspect that this was prepared. It had to, it couldn't come out of left field. Couldn't be, Groucho couldn't say, "That's a beautiful ring on your finger," and the woman says, "Yeah, that's a 25 carat diamond," or so forth. That he would never have asked it if he didn't know.
Oh, right.
So we had to write it so that it didn't come out of left field, so that he would be talking about his ring and lead into it, so you'd never suspect. And that was a very delicate bit of writing that we developed. So.
You knew Groucho so well, too. It was pretty easy, I imagine, for you to set these things up. Do you remember Cy Argovich? He's a bald little man. I think he was a shoe salesman or something. And he came on with Margaret Nicholson, who was one of the Miss Housing Development contestants.
Yeah, I hated that whole series. That was on CBS.
Was it? No, I think that was later years of You Bet Your Life. I think that was during the Groucho show.
Must have been the last season.
That's right.
Yeah. I remember that.
It's very chauvinistic.
It's terrible.
But anyway, Cy Argovich, I realized through seeing pictures of him on other shows, his big claim to fame, I think, was stuffing about 50 cigars in his mouth and smoking them at one time. But he doesn't do this on You Bet Your Life.
It was cut out. He did it on the show.
That's what I was wondering about. It just didn't go over very well. And there's also something funny about that show. Groucho gets in a personal insult, I guess you could call it, against Cy. He says, "Cy, you ought to be a perfect shoe salesman because when you're fitting the ladies' shoes, they can be powdering their nose by looking at the top of your head." And I suspect that he must have been told that he was going to say that because that kind of a joke where, you know, don't be offended if Groucho says this.
Oh, yeah. They knew we went over everything with him. So we could anticipate.
And he had an immediate comeback, or rather a setup. Groucho immediately followed that with, you must know quite a bit about the footwear front. Tell us, Si, what's the hottest things in women's shoes nowadays? And Si says, well, Groucho, the hottest things in women's shoes today, I think, must be Bridget Bardot. And then he has this smug look on his face. And you know that was said, huh?
Yeah, in all probability, that was his joke.
You think so?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we would never give anybody a joke.
But it seemed like Groucho fed him the line.
Oh, yeah, it was set up.
Uh-huh.
We knew he was going to say it, but it was something that was part of him.
I see.
You see. We would never give anybody a joke like that because you don't know what they'd do with it. It would sound like we told them to say it. No, we didn't make up anything. Everything people said was their own stuff. All we did was pare it down. We'd go over the interview with them in rehearsal for a long time. We'd go over everything. They said, well, now Groucho's going to say this. We wouldn't tell them Groucho's joke. But when Groucho says, how'd you meet your husband? This is what you told us, and this is what we want you to stick with.
I've got to ask you about one other joke. It's this woman who's got a very tight dress on. She's very shapely. And I'm just wondering if this is actually true what she said. She said her father was a meat distributor. And of course Groucho came up with, your father is a meat distributor? Well, if you're any indication, he certainly knows his business. Was her father a meat distributor, or was that just a
I think,
joke?
In all probability, he was. We wouldn't make up a thing like that. Now, sometimes the writers would try to fool me, and they would do it. And they would make it up. She might have told the writer, originally my father was a meat wholesaler. And they said, well, what does he do? Well, he distributes meat. Well, then they would say, well, just call him a meat distributor. And I didn't know that. I would be after him all the time. I'd say, look, when you guys give me back a script, it's got to be honest. I've got to rely on you. Because if it isn't, it's going to sound fake, and I don't want to be in that position. I want to give Groucho the truth. And so they were pretty good about it, but something like that, it's possible they may have put one over on it.
So even the set-up jokes had a tie-in with the actual person.
Oh, yeah. Anything set up was all based on what they told us. We didn't make up anything for them. We couldn't, you could tell when they, you just couldn't take that chance. They were... I remember one of the funniest things, the biggest laugh Groucho ever got, and he very seldom laughed. I asked him one time, I said, why don't you laugh? And he says, I'm not up there to enjoy it and laugh. I'm up there to make the audience laugh. So he didn't laugh. Well, anyway, this one was a case, and I don't know whether it was in the book or not.
There's mention of a laugh. It may be the same one, but what do you know?
Well, we had this woman who was kind of what we used to call a professional contestant. Would go to all of the shows.
Yeah.
But in her case, I don't think she did, but she could have. She was that kind of a brassy dame. And she had some fairly funny stuff. And so we go over the thing with her, with everything you could anticipate. She knew what was coming, and she had some funny stuff to say, too. Well, when it gets on the air, and Groucho being Groucho, he starts ad-libbing all over the place. And he would ask her something, and she'd start to answer, and he'd go on and try to make a joke. And right in the middle of it, she got mad. And she says, Groucho, you're stepping on my lines. And he just broke up, and he turned around, and his contestants were striking back.
I didn't see that show, but there's another one with Prince Ross. Do you remember that guy, the African prince? And there was a black Ethiopian, and his partner was a housewife from Chicago, and she was black. And she really was. I think her name was Mrs. Madeline Dudley.
Yeah.
But
she was a chicken poop.
That's right, and he just broke up.
Yeah,
it was great. That was a wonderful show.
Yeah.
That was one of those that was broken up.
Yeah, there was just so much we couldn't keep.
And he says, I was wondering about that. When they break up a show and the contestants come out a second time, and Is that all filmed after the complete interview?
We do 2 shows. A lot
really? They do come back.
We always did 2 shows a night anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And where we knew it was going to be powerhouse like that, and we would plan on it and break it, and we would all plan on it. And the contestants would bring a change of costume, and then we'd come on and do the second show, and they'd finish it. So it was all done in one night. But it was actually broken.
I thought it was all one taping, one show, and then they just had them come out a second time. And they kind of
sometimes that happened where it just got out of control and got funnier than we anticipated. But that was really kind of rare. We knew most of the time what we wanted.
Yeah. Sometimes Groucho's kind of stumbling over the introduction. He says, "Welcome back. You were here last week, and we have a different secret word this week."
I used to be so embarrassed because he just could not read lines. He was just awful with that kind of stuff. And he always sounded the same. Say the secret word and you win $100. I would just indicate that. I wanted him to say that in his own words every week because I couldn't write it different every week.
It also seemed that George was so concerned about getting the rules straight with the contestants, especially when they had, the different category questions. He would say, well, you have $200 and 2 more chances to make 5. It seemed as if he was really concerned about stating.
Oh, he wanted everybody to completely understand what was going on, yeah. George is one of the spokesmen for Home Savings.
That's right. Yeah, I saw one of those.
You saw him? Harry Bonzel has been with him for years.
Is Harry alive?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I love Harry because I've got several Burns and Allen TV shows, and he's on those.
Yeah, Harry was with Home for, I guess 20 years, 25 years. And he's getting along in years, and it was his idea to get George. And Harry's still on a lot of them.
Is he living in Los Angeles?
Yeah.
I can't find his number.
I don't know. I'll tell you how you can find him. Call Lakeside Golf Club during the day.
Lakeside Golf Club?
Harry's over there playing gin all the time.
Great. Sounds like George.
Oh, George would play gin. He's not a gambler. George, he's a strange guy. He really is.
He's really busy now.
Yeah. But that's how you can get Harry. Lakeside Golf Club.
Yeah, great.
And ask him to page Vonzel. And if he's anywhere, you'll be there. Unless he's sick or something. I haven't heard about it.
Do you have any interest in seeing these shows that I brought?
No, yeah. I've seen them all so many times.
Yeah, I know that.
I get kind of feeling depressed when I see them. Because everybody's so much older and a lot of them are gone. And it's all I don't really like to see them. I had them all, I saved them.
You did.
When we broke up, we filmed the show through an outfit called Gumcraft.
That's right.
And they had a little place over here, a little studio over here on Melrose. And after the original prints went out to the network, there were 3, I think. It was in New York, Chicago, and L.A. They were always sent back here. I think New York might have kept theirs for file. At any rate, they got them, and they piled them up out there in the studio, in the hangar. So when we went out of business, Juan says, we got all these prints over there, and I don't know what to do with them. I ain't no way I can keep them. I don't know if anybody's ever going to want them, and they were going to throw them away.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, I had a house. I had a full acre. It had been built originally for Cedric Hardwick, the English actor.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And then another guy came along, famous piano player. I can't remember his name.
Not Liberace. Not Liberace.
No, it's long before Liberace. This, I think it was Earl Father Hines, not him, but somebody like him. It wasn't black. And he was a glider enthusiast. And he built a building out there, 25 by 75, with a beautiful concrete floor and everything. So I had lots of room. It was a big hangar-like building. So I took about 350 or 400 prints and stored them there in the shed that I had. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but there they were.
Oh.
So then two things happened.
Yeah.
NBC said, we're going to sell it for syndication. Will you send us the following? No, first they wrote and they said, what 262 shows, which are the 5 days a week for 1 year. What 262 shows do you recommend to me? So I picked out the ones we had, and I recommended about 300.
That must be quite a job.
Well, I see in my records I had graded every show. I knew I was very familiar with every show. So then they said, well, will you send us those? So I sent those prints, about 300 prints back there. Now I've still got another 200. I don't know how many television shows we made. I've forgotten now, but I know I still had enough for...
Does that audition film that they filmed at CBS exist?
No.
Oh, that's too bad. I know the tape.
I have the recording of the radio audition.
That's right.
You've heard that, I guess.
I've heard most of it.
That was where Groucho was trying to be a real fast...
I know. That's the way he always was in those early shows.
Anyway, so that's how now at the same time, they're talking about building a Hollywood museum out here. And they had we're going to put it over on where the parking lot is at Hollywood Bowl. The city, LA County, gave them the ground. There was one guy who had a house up there, and he wouldn't give in. And they had a big fight over that and a big suit. Well, it happened. That was Marion Pollock's ex-husband. She should have got the money that guy got for that house because they had adopted a child. And she had no support from that old man.
Oh, really?
Anyway, so when they decided to build a Hollywood museum, they started collecting stuff. So I gave them the rest of the prints that I had.
I see.
And they are all sitting now in a vault somewhere. I don't know, in a county vault somewhere.
Really? Huh.
Then
you don't let them go to waste.
Then we had a guy, a writer, when we started the show, named Ed Tyler.
Doc Tyler.
You know Ed Tyler, the doctor.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I had to fire him.
Really?
Yeah, because he made me mad on several counts. But the real reason I got mad is he was trying to promote loot. And at that time it was legal. You could, if you mentioned Cadillac and they gave you a car, well, okay, you could have it. But today you do that and you go to jail.
Yeah.
But in those days it was legal. So Tyler was always trying to work things into the script or trying to get me to leave things in.
I know Benny used to do that quite a bit.
Yeah, oh well, that's another story in itself. So that always made me mad about Tyler doing that. Well, then he got together with High one day, and they were going to go on strike for more money. And I could see them. It was the night we were doing the show, and they were down at one end of the hall. And I could see their heads together. And poor High is the sweetest guy in the world. He'll do anything like a big puppy. He'll do anything you ask him to. Well, I knew Tyler was responsible for it, and he sends poor High. He comes trotting down, and they wanted more money. And Goodell was standing there, and he turned to me, and I says, "Can't give it to him. We haven't got it in the budget." Goodell was mad, and he had a pencil, and he broke the pencil.
Don't get upset.
So I said, as soon as I had gone back, I said to Goodell, I said, "We got to get rid of Tyler. I'm going to have to let him go. I don't like the way he's doing these things." So we did.
It's too bad.
And that was where Howard Harris came into it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Tyler, of course, got very angry about the treatment we gave him. So then when we got down to re-releasing the shows in syndication, Tyler was going to, this is my chance to get even with you guys, and he would not agree with NBC on contracts. He wouldn't give his permission for anything he was involved in. But fortunately, we had let him go right in the middle of the television series. So that I counted up, and we had our 265 shows, enough for 1 year, which is all NBC wanted.
I see.
And I said to the lawyer at NBC, Graham, who's I guess still there, I said, well, call Tyler and tell him that we don't need him. We got him without him. Well, that little decision cost Ed Tyler over $150,000.
Oh, God. So we'll never see those shows.
We'll never see those shows. Well, they might, but I think they threw the negative
That's
away.
too bad.
Well, there was the greatest show we ever did was included in there. Gonzalez.
I've never seen the show, but I've seen the clip from it. That was about 50 or something.
I don't know what you can do about it. You might want to talk to him when you're out. He's a hell of a cute guy. He lives out
Gonzalez?
here. Yeah, I've got his phone number in the office.
Oh, really?
And they gave him a print of the show. Well, he was in there, and there were several other really, really good ones. But
Alice, or who was the female that was so funny? Bagnovic or
Badovnik. Yeah, I guess she was Tyler's. Oh, she was on 3 or 4 times. Mrs. Badovnik, yeah.
Oh, yeah, she was...
she came from Badovnik, Czechoslovakia. She was married to a guy named Badovnik. He left her and she married another guy named Badovnik.
Confusing.
She was a funny old lady. Yeah, so there were several good shows in that. But we just...
Would it be possible to print up the records you have of the show?
Oh, no, it would be prohibitive.
Because I've been relying on what I found in TV Guide, and, you know, they don't list everything, especially that show. If a celebrity appeared on the show, they would, but otherwise...
I'll be glad to let you have you come over to the house and look through it. Make any notes you want.
What you thinking there, Mom?
I would love to do that.
Yeah.
Because I wrote John Goodell about that, and he didn't have any records.
Yeah, nobody has that.
NBC doesn't.
It goes back, my records are for every show, but unfortunately the first shows, the radio shows, the first maybe 50 shows, I would just say about to be, or how much, or the reasons they were picked.
Not the names.
No, I didn't have the names or the identities. That's in the master one that has since been lost. But all I had was the reason they were picked. Like we were trying to be honest when we started the show, and we would go through the audience before in the warm-up, and we would listen to people. And we would say that night we wanted how they met their husband.
Really?
So we would listen to them, and then we would pick the 2 best and bring them up on stage, and Fenneman would have a little game that they played, and we let the audience pick the one that went on the show.
Oh, I see.
And we did that with everybody except the few invited guests that we had, which were very few. Most of them were picked that way. Well, I very quickly realized that we were losing an awful lot of good stuff. So I decided to hell with that. We'll just go find our own, interview them, and find that material.
Yeah.
There's never anyone from that said they were a great fan of Groucho's and they wanted to come on, is there?
Oh, yeah, but there was nothing funny in that, and Groucho would be ill at ease with them.
It kind of annoys me when I see a fan club president on there, and I'm thinking, gee, if only I could have gone on the show, you know, here I am.
Well, there were other fan clubs. The only other one that I remember was the Gordon McRae fan club.
I've got that show.
Have you really?
It's really funny that you mentioned it.
Well, because the only reason that's on there is because Gordy's a good friend of mine.
Oh.
And I thought, well, I'll give him a little plug, and I got the girls.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But I don't
think
remember...
someone from Elvis's fan club was on. Elvis Presley.
No, not that I know of.
Well, there's a middle-aged woman, I think, and she was a member of
there
it.
could be.
That was
It
when
could
John
be.
Charles Thomas was on, and they had that big debate about, rock and roll.
Yeah, that's right.
don't think I'd say that I have anything.
Well, your later records do have the names, don't they?
Yeah, most of the television shows have the names.
If I could only see that, I'd really appreciate it.
Welcome to look at it.
Well, maybe I could call you later tonight.
I'm going to go down to the beach for a couple of days the end of the week, and I'm going to be going home next week. I have to go to Chattanooga.
I hope when we hit Cincinnati.
So it would have to be
I hope when we hit Detroit, we'll have
tonight or tomorrow night or Wednesday night. Any one of the 3 nights, as far as I know, we'll be home. Now, we may go out for dinner, but when we do, we're home by 8:30 or 8 o'clock.
What would you suggest?
Call me.
Call you
on that same number. Call me about 6 o'clock, 6:30. And
I've got to go back to Anaheim, but I suspect I'll be back by then.
Well, why don't you make it tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night?
Yeah. I got an idea where my wife's going to want to go out.
Okay.
Yeah.
That'll be just great. I didn't think anything existed. We're working on this television credit thing, and You Bet Your Life is such a big part of their output that getting a list like that would be wonderful.
Well, after all, we made over 600 shows.
That's taken to that, in the same way that
there's a big
gold album is not nearly
Maybe I could Xerox it rather than make notes.
Oh, you might be able to. A lot of it is just in kind of faint pencil. But take a look at it and put a Xerox. Now, the syndicator Xerox. Because it's syndicated, it's Fred syndication. He took it in Xerox.
He did.
And that was how he built his show.
I wrote to the syndicator, and it seemed they didn't have any guest credits at all.
Oh, he didn't know anything. All he had was his
They indicated that TV Guide had it, but they wouldn't relinquish anything like that. I guess it's tied up in their computer or something.
Yeah. No, well, you're welcome to look at mine.
That'd be wonderful. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time now. Leave a tip. Let me take care of the tip.
No.
Come on. It's a great privilege just to talk to you like this.
No, it's interesting you say, what I've been feeling is that I gotta sit this is what I'm saying for the
Do you find that there are very many people, like me that write to you about that show?
Very few.
In other words, it's like...
You guys are unique, and that's why I go out of my way to help if I can.
Very kind of you.
No, there obviously there are a lot of people that love the show.
Let's use our next 30 days
organized.
After the 11th of next month. Let's just say like on the 11th.
I can't think of there's a couple other clubs, but I can't remember even where they are.
Can I ask you to sign this book? I loved it over here.
I haven't got a pen with me.
Well, I do, so you can't use that as an alibi.
I have this picture.
Yeah, I know
that used to hang on my wall.
Oh, really? That's all one thing?
Yeah, it's a montage. I had it made myself.
Oh, really?
And it's the original picture that's in my garage. Let me tell you. Is about the size of that door.
The Marx Brothers Council podcast is produced and edited by Bob Gassell. Matthew Cunningham's books, The Annotated Marx Brothers, and That's Me, Groucho, are published by McFarland. Noah Diamond's book, Give Me a Thrill, The Story of All Say She is published by Bear Manor Media. Both can be found at major book outlets. For more info on this and all episodes, visit our website at marxbrotherscouncilpodcast.com. Also look for us on Twitter. And for the place to talk Marx and meet fellow fans, join us on the lively Marx Brothers Council Facebook group. See you next time!